I'm literally and figuratively consuming light when you go out and, just take a walk. It doesn't need to be any spiritual Egyptian sun gazing sphinx practice, whatever you're into. You just need to get some light as soon as you can throughout the day, because it's setting up again your neurochemistry and your hormones and your circadian rhythm for the day.
How can we maximize our morning routine for better health?
Well, I think a starting point for that would be thinking about your morning. Is the morning routine is going to start with the evening.
Interesting.
Your evening setup is what prepares you to be able to open up, wake up, and actually be ready to engage with the day. So something that I think is invaluable for preparation for the morning routine is to create a list of what it is that you want to be pursuing for that day. So, and also just having a moment of stillness, before going to bed. So kind of throughout our lives, I think we're really filled with minutia throughout the entirety of our days. And everything is just kind of rolling on top of the next, on top of the next, on top of the next. And having some type of specific anchor points throughout the day, I think is absolutely invaluable. So meditation is a really obvious one for that, but it could also be like taking a walk. If you have a dog. Dogs are such an amazing tool for catalyzing healthy practices.
What about cats? Not so much.
Less. Well, they're helpful for touch.
Yeah, they are. Oxytocin.
Oxytocin.
That's a big thing.
There is some research about touch, and we'll stay focused on the thread of the morning stuff. But there was research on University of Miami that demonstrated touch to be helpful with children, babies in incubators, so preemies. The researchers just offered 15 minutes of touch 3 times a day to the babies in these incubators, and they found they grew, I think it was 53% faster than the other children that were untouched, uncontacted. And they were able to be released obviously sooner, since they were growing and metabolizing food more efficiently. So it's such an interesting conversation of how we, you talk a lot about nutrition, obviously, and so many other things. But I think that even touch and, environmental conditions, textures, like right now I'm wearing this awkward, silly shawl that's incredibly comfortable and soft. That affects the way that we feel. So I would think of, in addition to all of your amazing work, I would add in touch as literally almost like a physical nutrient in a way.
Vitamin T. Wow, I love that.
Vitamin T. Yeah, at least with preemie babies. So the night before starting off, get yourself organized. So get your house clean is a really important thing. So like each day having a punctuated end of the day, like period set, like cool, that was the day. I think something that's incredibly valuable as well. And there's been a ton of research to suggest that just having some type of punctuated gratitude practice, so which could also act as an anchor point. So at the end of the day, reflecting back and saying, what did I do well today? I think that's a really powerful practice to get into, because most of us are so habituated towards how do we mess up? How do I suck?
Right.
Why am I a loser?
Yeah.
So starting to rehabituate that mental chatter. William James called us bundles of habits. William James, he was widely known as the father of modern psychology. So we're just these bundles of habits, and throughout the day we average 60 to 80,000 thoughts each day, and typically most of them are just reiterations of yesterday and last week and last month and last year. Do you ever think about that? How consistent your thoughts are?
Oh yeah, and how inane half of them, at least, are about things that I'd rather not think about.
Right.
It's one of the reasons why I think meditation is so beneficial. And I'm not, I'm a very novice meditator. I meditate when I can will myself to do it, but I found it to be very helpful in terms of directing my attention off the thoughts I'd rather not have and back into the present moment.
Sometimes I think meditation can be conflated with very almost like feminine, kind of like soft. Like it's not, you don't see a lot of dudes meditating on the cover of Muscle and Fitness.
Right.
It's kind of like, it's kind of like, ooh, it's for emo people or chicks or, it's, but it's an incredible, like from a masculine perspective, which masculine doesn't relate to genitalia. It's just, a quality, but a masculine lens on meditation that I like is I like to gamify it, and think of it. It's like almost like you're like sharpening a blade, but instead of sharpening a blade inside of your kitchen with a stone, you're sharpening the blade of your consciousness and your capacity for attention. So when you are in a practice of meditation, which I think a lot of people don't understand, and I still have a lot to understand about it as well, but it's really as simple as picking a point. In like yoga speak, they might call it like your dristi if you're doing like a movement practice. You're like picking a point in the room. Um, your the point may be your breath, anapanasati,
Or like a mantra, right?
or a mantra, or a candle, or I mean, it's just pick a point. And I think that there's a lot of maybe debate, unnecessary debate of like whose mantra or dogma or practice is like the best. I think from a mental, cerebral perspective, it's really just finding a point, allowing your mind to do what it does, which is wander to this thought and that thought and the next one, and then consciously engaging back onto that point. So you could start a really amazing meditation practice just looking at a water bottle. There's a water bottle sitting on here. I'm just focusing on the water bottle, and then suddenly I start thinking like, oh, this is kind of boring looking at this water bottle. Oh, okay, come back to the water bottle.
Hmm.
Oh, I probably need to go take out the dog, whatever thing. It's like, oh, come back to the water bottle. And doing that for, 12 minutes that's like a really, as far as like a low, what's the minimum viable, what's the,
Product. Yeah, minimum
yeah,
viable product.
yeah. So that's like at the low end, that's a really great benchmark to get to 12 minutes.
Wow.
What is her name? Did you have Dr. Amit? She did Rogan's podcast.
Mishi
In
Jha.
Mishi Jha.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's
She
her.
was great. She's been on the show.
Okay, cool. So that was her. I'm borrowing that from her.
When
And
she
so,
borrowed that from Vedic meditation, which is something that humans have been practicing and perfecting for millennia.
yeah, yeah, exactly.
But I think what's so useful about it is that it brings you into the present moment, which is, I think, useful, especially in the context of anxiety and depression. Anxiety is obsessive worry about the future, and depression is excessive rumination about the past.
Mm.
And so, what an easy way to dissolve worry, right? But to bring your focus back into the present moment.
Yeah.
And that's what I think meditation offers.
Yeah, yeah, but I think that, like making it be like gamifying it, I think is an incredibly valuable tool and approach. At least for me, I found that to be really helpful.
Yeah.
So as opposed to I'm doing this spiritual thing, I'm meditating, I'm like waiting for some transcendent samadhi, like it's like literally all it is you playing the game with the mind drifts away and you come back to that. Mind drifts away, you come to that, back to that, and eventually with time, you notice it starts to feel a little bit easier and actually feels like joyful. And then, Sam Harris talks about this where, he comes from a Vipassana background where it's like hours of meditation each day. Traditional Vipassana, like the initial one, where you go for 10 days, you get up at like 4:30 in the morning, you meditate for an hour, then you take a little walk and you do that for 10 consecutive days. And then eventually you can start to almost like own that state and be able to start to integrate that into your daily life. So after
Wow.
doing several Vipassanas, eventually they allow you to do a walking Vipassana,
Hmm.
where you're starting to integrate meditation into just taking a walk around some stony path for a while. But it's laying that foundation of clarity, of focus first, and then from there you can kind of build out. And so having those anchor points throughout the day, there's just endless amounts of evidence to suggest that it's helpful with pretty much every biological marker to indicate health. But it's a really beautiful practice to start to create some separation from this day to that day, and et cetera.
Yeah. So 12 minutes, you would say, before bed helps prime the pump for an optimal morning.
12 minutes before bed, and also including with that a breakdown of just like a going back and kind of having an audit of your day.
Hmm.
And I think specifically coming from a place of, what were my wins today?
I love
What did I
that.
enjoy about today?
Yeah.
And I think that's something that like a common conversation now is in the space of longevity.
Hmm.
We're trying to live to 150 years old, or, live forever.
Yeah.
And it's like, if you're not excited about your existence, like what are you living for exactly? And within that space, I don't hear much conversation around starting to center ourselves, from a place of joy. So I think that that's a really important component to integrate in there, is like just scanning back through your wins, then also not being just eternally optimistic about everything, also coming back and saying, like, how could I have improved today?
Hmm.
So coming at it from like a business lens, and saying, like, okay, hey, cool, great, did a great job, and what can we do better?
I love that.
And so I think that's a really powerful way just to kind of create a little list. And once you write things out, they become real and organized, and you can look at it and hold it. And then the same thing the next day, come in and say, cool, like, what are the two things that would move the needle for me tomorrow?
Hmm.
And really waking up already primed to own that day, to use Aubrey Marcus's term for his book, Own the Day.
It's really cool. You're like, there's actually a beautiful quote in your book, and I'm going to paraphrase it because I don't remember it verbatim, but it's basically like, what you want to, before going to bed, it's really interesting to think about seeding your subconscious
Yeah.
with your intention for the following day. Like to seed your subconscious, because your subconscious does all this work overnight, right?
Yeah.
And yeah, you have the ability. It's like this really powerful window of opportunity before you go to sleep to plant the seeds of what you hope your consciousness will grow from itself the next day.
Yeah. And then within that, with seeding, there's a term in relation to plants. It's called, I think it's referred to as thigmomorphogenesis, and essentially is you can bend, say, like a bonsai tree or any kind of plant to fit whatever your vision of how you'd like it to grow. But
Mm.
that also happens anytime wind is exposed to a tree or any kind of plant. That thigmomorphogenesis is their response to their environmental conditions to grow to match the shape of their environment. And so you're doing that throughout the entirety of your life. Right now, as we're sitting here, we are, we're a term from a biological human term is mechanotransduction. Katie Bowman goes deep into all this stuff. I just recently recorded a conversation with her just a few weeks back, so all this stuff is fresh from her mind as well. But as we're sitting in this position, we're mechanotransducing ourselves to fit this shape of this chair. So as your bum is pressing against the bottom of that chair, you're creating electrical charge in and around the connective tissue and the bones that are feeling that pressure. So that then creates a response, electrical response, called piezoelectricity.
Hmm.
And then you have these cells that either build tissue up around that space or break tissue down. Osteoclast, osteoblast. You've heard of like blast class cells.
Yeah.
And so right now, and we're going to get into how this relates to like being better in the morning, but right now, anyone listening to this, and you and I, we are literally architects for our body as we're sitting here. Like, we're training right now, and our body is it's growing to fit this position. Where that becomes interesting from a mental emotional perspective. And we include this research in the Align Method book as well. It's from San Francisco State University. They did interesting study with students where they found students that were hunched over into, in the book we call it like a mopey archetypal position, kind of like hunched over, forward head posture, rolled forward shoulders, spine rolled forward,
You're describing how I'm sitting
knees
pretty much right
collapsed
now.
in, all that
I
stuff.
always become a lot more posture conscious whenever I hang out with
Well,
you.
I'm really describing modern culture, as a widely modern culture, that's, and it's not a moralistic judgment, like it's bad or good. It's just that the general postural musculoskeletal patterns of the day are veered towards collapse.
Hmm.
So when you're sitting down on a chair and your pelvis is wrapped underneath and your head is rolled forward in that forward head posture, shoulders are going forward, you're creating kind of like dams and blocks in those various different joints that they perform optimally when they have full functional range of motion in all directions. And when they get blocked up, then the body starts to kind of uh, it inhibits itself to be able to express with its full potential.
It's amazing that we can talk about this in the language of anatomy and physiology when like ancient um is it like Ayurveda or something? Like the language of chakras, right? Like
Yeah,
sitting
sure.
sitting straight so that your chakras are aligned,
Yeah,
so that you can then project out with your third eye. This is not a language that I'm used to speaking,
yeah,
obviously, clearly, but it's funny that they overlap. that they're
Yeah.
so analogous to one another,
And
right?
and the chakras, which chakras, I mean, there's a lot of different systems. Maybe there's 7 chakras, maybe there's 12 chakras, depending upon the system you're looking at. This is not my area of depth at all. But what I think is interesting about it is those also relate into Western anatomical speak to some degree because they're areas of complexity in the body.
Hmm.
So the root chakra and the pelvic floor and the abdomen and the heart and the throat and the brain, the third eye, all those places are places of complexity. There's nerve ganglia and arteries and lymphatic glands and all this stuff. So if you look at the body kind of like a highway, the nadis is the term for the kind of like rivers. There's like energetic rivers, like the meridians. Those would be individual roads going down through the arms and kind of interconnecting throughout the whole entire body. And then in places like the elbows or the wrist or the shoulder or the heart or the brain, those are areas of complexity where all of those roads are conjoining into one. And then we refer to that as a chakra,
Hmm. I love this.
which is
S-
very interesting.
So is this why people recommend why meditation teachers recommend sitting in an upright position with your spine straight?
So this is what I was getting to with the San Francisco State University stuff. They found that the students that were in hunched over, mopey positions, it was easier for them to access more depressive memories.
Wow.
And when students would be in more of an upright, shoulders back, open up the throat, up the organs, it's just the general universal indication that you're winning.
Wow.
It would
Interesting.
be easier for them to be able to access more like uplifting memories,
Wow.
which seems maybe at first kind of like, oh, that's crazy. But if even stew in it for half a minute, you're like, oh, of course. Like every person across the planet wins a race the same way. Every person loses a race the same way. We all get dumped by a girl the same way, the same postural positions and expressions of, oh, it's this general sensation of collapse.
Hmm.
And when you're in that position in NLP speak, neurolinguistic programming, they have a term called anchoring. So maybe every time you do a podcast or do something that you care about, you might put some specific song on, or maybe do some essential oils. And so you are anchoring your senses to have this memory of, oh, when I smell this or hear that, I feel this way. So posturally speaking, we've been anchoring ourselves for millennia. When I'm in that kind of hunched over defensive position, typically this type of, environmental stimulus is happening. I'm defending, I'm fighting, I'm sulking. And when I'm upright, arms up overhead, historically, that would be the memories where I was winning.
Yeah.
And so when you are doing this, accessing your subconscious or asking a question of your subconscious, like the quote in the book, I think it was like Edison or something. Um, I think it was like, what did he say? He said, never go to bed without asking a question of your subconscious. Wasn't
Yeah.
it
I
something like
like
that?
that. Something like that.
Something along those lines.
Beautiful.
Yeah. Just having some relationship with that,
Mm.
that like inner speak, inner voice. A beautiful opportunity there as well is to start to pay attention to your physical position while you're doing it.
Mm.
So a lot of in like the gratitude world or consciousness world, um, I think postural patterns and movement as a whole is it's like an underspoken aspect of it. And there's a lot of riches if we turn that stone up over, just paying attention to the postural patterns as we're doing the things.
I love it. So as we're preparing for bed to uh, optimize our morning ahead,
Yep.
um, what else are we doing to optimize sleep? You've actually changed my sleep.
Hmm.
Yeah. Remember when you stayed over at my house and you were like, the lights are just
Oh yeah.
way too bright up here? I now, when I'm getting ready for bed, I don't put on the overhead lights.
Right.
I don't put on the overhead lights. I have a red light bulb in a lamp by my bed,
Mm.
which I use exclusively when I'm winding down for bed. And I don't even put the lights on in my bathroom.
Yep.
I have like a little tiny red night light that is very dim and it provides just enough light for me to see what I'm doing, flossing my teeth, brushing my teeth, peeing before I go to bed.
Yeah.
And that's pretty much it.
Yeah.
I'm getting to bed and I feel like a hunter gatherer while I'm doing so.
Yeah. Well, that's what we were talking about that before on your, or I guess on my podcast before this recorded. And throughout our days, we're in this liminal space of light where we're not getting full spectrum sunlight. We're getting kind of this like junk light throughout the day, LEDs and such. And then when we go to bed and our bodies are craving that darkness, now we're still getting this blue light. So that's this ongoing blur of it's kind of dark and kind of light, but we're never getting that not never. but it would be more idyllic if we could start to instill full darkness and full spectrum light throughout the day. Allow that the pendulum to fully swing.
Yeah,
Uh,
most of our mornings are not bright enough, and our nights are not dark enough.
yeah, yeah. And so when you are going to bed, that's a really beautiful thing. Start to light candles, maybe get a salt lamp. If you are just all you have at the place that you're at is blue lights, you could get some blue light blocking glasses. If I travel, I'll bring candles with me, just because it's just nice. Think of the way that when you are with a partner, like a romantic partner, how do you romance your partner? You might light some candles, you might play some soothing music, you might like tidy the place up, make it feel good, make it feel clean.
Make them a steak.
You might make the mistake. You might like burn some wood or incense or
Yeah.
or essential oils. So we do all that stuff for someone else, and it makes it feel away. And the next day you wake up, you're like, that was the best night of my life. Because we had that accountability and that opportunity to be able to really treat someone else the way that ultimately I think that we all like to be treated. But sometimes it takes someone else to be able to have the reminders like, oh, this is what it feels like to treat a human right.
Mm.
So if we can start to instill that into our own practices, it doesn't need to be super like weird. You don't need to like play romantic music or whatever you want for yourself, but like romance yourself a little bit, I think.
I
And
love that idea.
something as simple as just clean up for yourself.
Mm.
Make the place smell nice for yourself.
Put on a vibe. Put on like your
Put on a
favorite
vibe
music.
for
Yeah.
yourself.
Set
Light some candles.
set the mood lighting. Set the mood.
Set the mood. And then that also, sets your whole endocrine system to be able to produce effectively. It's like you're tuning your neurochemistry all the time.
I love
With your
that.
environmental conditions, light is one of the primary ones.
Now, do you sleep on a mattress or the floor? I feel like you sleep on the floor.
Bed of nails.
Bed of nails. Yeah.
Yeah,
That's what I thought.
yeah. No, normal mattress. But it would be great if we could be. w- It would be ideal, and I feel we're potentially drifting away from the morning thing, so we'll come back to it. But what is valuable about sleeping on a lower mattress would be that you would be able to get more squat time in.
Hmm.
So modern culture is largely divorced from our hips going below the height of our knees. And pretty interesting that that's the case, considering when we take a poo in the woods, when you defecate, going into that deep squat position, it literally elongates the rectum and relaxes. It relaxes the rectum for you to, opens up your
T-
poop chute for you to take a poo. So it's called the anorectal angle. When
hmm.
it's standing, there's a muscle called the puborectalis, wraps around the front of the anus or the rectum rather. And when you're standing, it contracts and keeps yourself from, pooping your pants while you're taking a walk. And then as you go into that deep squat position, that muscle relaxes, anorectal angle elongates,
Hmm.
and you're able to take a proper poo. We've largely divorced ourselves from that range of motion in modern culture, which is really impressive. And then
Crazy.
and then elderly, the number one leading reason for assisted living is fall risk. There's nothing human about falling and not being able to get up off of the ground.
Right.
That's not just an inherent like, yeah, of course. I'm 60.
Yeah. No.
Like, no.
It's because all of the muscles used in getting up off the floor have atrophied and become almost vestigial.
Yeah, exactly. And the joints that would have that full supple range of motion have started to calcify over.
Wow.
They've become impinged and stuck and bound, and you don't have the physical, structural, or neurological function or relationship to be able to actually go through this full ranges of motion. And so the simple solution for that would just be to take yourself through those ranges of motion with regularity. And now we're really veering away from the morning stuff, but something that you could do to integrate into your evening and morning is spend a little bit of time on the ground.
Hmm.
So when you're doing, maybe if you are doing some journaling or you're doing maybe meditation or maybe you're, I don't know, whatever you're into, playing video games, like whatever you're doing, if you're doing that from the ground, now suddenly you're stacking this really powerful longevity variable into your daily life. And it's not just longevity, it's also the now. Having mobile toes and ankles and knees and hips and full function of your pelvic floor muscles, and like that makes you an athlete now. and it makes you sovereign and autonomous for the rest of your life.
What else can we do to spend more time on the floor? Because I love this idea. I actually do this every morning. I have a yoga mat laid out in front of my bed that I don't roll up. I keep it out so as to lower the friction so that I can spend more time on the floor every morning. It's part
Yeah.
of my morning routine now.
Yeah.
I get up, sometimes I'll meditate, I'll put my back up against my bed frame with my butt on my yoga mat, and I'll do like a 10 to 20 minute meditation, whatever I can muster. Sometimes I just get up and I do some light yoga from that mat. Other times I'll get on the floor and I'll play with my cat. But yeah, I love this idea of spending more time on the floor.
Well, you become the shape of your environment. So you having the cat in your house, you are moved by the cat. If the cat wasn't there, how many less calories would you have burnt or ranges of motion would your body have passed through had you not been drawn in to be moved by the cat?
Yeah.
The cat's existence moves your body.
We stretch in front of each other. Like I'll do a little stretch in the morning. She'll come and stretch out in front of me.
Yeah.
It's like the cutest thing.
That's very cute.
Yeah.
That's very nice. TikTok?
We haven't TikToked it.
Oh,
yeah.
okay.
But that's a good idea for a future TikTok. Yeah. I've started using TikTok, so it's good to.
There we go.
Thanks for the idea.
But so that is something to think about for people at home listening or wherever you're listening. Really acknowledge that you are the Jim Rohn quote, you're the product of the 5 people you spend most time with.
Mm.
You are the shape of your environment. You are an expression of your environment. Alan Watts talks about the old philosopher Alan Watts talks about we perceive a separation between bees and flowers, but it's one continuous organism. Without the bee, there's no flower. Without the flower, there's no bee. So you are continuous with this room. You become the shape of this room.
Mm.
So that's the lighting affects you at a neurochemical level and a hormonal level and all levels. But then the shape of your chairs, or the shape of the fact that you have a yoga mat on the ground, or maybe you have spaciousness in your room to be able to lay down on the rug. If you don't have enough space to lay down and allow your body to just like stretch out and turn and twist, you won't do it.
Yeah.
You just won't. Except for maybe when you drive 25 minutes to go like pay a trainer to have you do that. So, and there's tons of research around this as well. Particularly, there was a gal called Joan Vernikos. She was I've done a podcast with her on mine as well. Actually, she's was the director of health and science or something. I don't know her exact title was at NASA, but she worked with NASA for like 40 years, working with the health of astronauts, and particularly around the impact of zero gravity, while they're in space, how it's like really deleterious for the body. People end up losing muscle and losing bone density and getting fatter, and just like their body kind of like, it just turns into a jellyfish. Aging is expedited. Like it's really rough on the body. Like gravity is incredibly healing for the body.
Mm.
Without it, we're a blob. And what she found among people in general throughout NASA, what they found was that having titrates or like drips or regularity of movement throughout the day, that dramatically more supportive for an astronaut than having one big blowout workout once a day, and then allowing the body to just kind of float in this sedentary nothingness for the rest of the day. And so the way that the human body functions optimally is by having regular bouts of micro movements throughout the day. If people are interested in burning calories, burning fat, there's a term that you're familiar with called NEAT, non-exercise activity thermogenesis.
Getting fancy now.
Yeah, we're going fancy.
No, I love NEAT. NEAT's
Yeah,
great. NEAT's so important.
It's important, and it's a funny thing because these things that if you lived a basically fundamentally healthy lifestyle, you wouldn't know about any of this stuff. You'd hear about like, oh yeah, sure, whatever. Like I fidget and I move around, and I get up and down off of the ground, and I reach up over my head. And
I do all this stuff
I
naturally.
take walks.
Yeah.
Like what? Like NEAT? What are you talking about? But in a culture that's devoid of that, and we're, we kind of have this deficit, then suddenly it's like, oh yeah, we need some of this polysyllabic non-exercise activity thermogenesis in our lives.
Yeah.
And within that, you can burn upwards of a person that has a lot of NEAT in their life versus someone that has, less, can burn upwards of 2,000 more calories than the person that's just sedentary, still
Wow.
guy. So those little micro movements throughout the day, they're incredibly powerful. And you compound that times a week, a month, a year, a decade, your whole life, we're looking at, really serious implications around longevity.
Well, what does that say for people that go to the gym to burn calories, right? The fact that we burn so many more calories via NEAT.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. And there's within gym, there's another fancy unnecessary term that was from China. Researchers in China came up with this thing called illusory invulnerability.
Hmm.
Illusory invulnerability is something that happens with I've experienced this. You probably experienced this as well, where you do a big workout and then you have this kind of like invulnerable perception of, oh, now I can just eat anything,
Right.
or I'll just go and just like fart around on the couch for the next 3 hours, which is fine. There's nothing wrong with resting. Like I'm like very pro. We got to rest, very
Yeah.
important. But the idea that you can do this big blowout workout and now you can kind of just throw the rest of the day away, that's very problematic for the human organism. Like we don't respond well to that.
Yeah. So get more NEAT into your day. I think super important. I love that
and,
advice.
and observe your environment and observe how you become the shape of your environment. And what that means is, if all you have is the option to sit in that same kind of archetypal hunched over position of modernity, then what else would you expect other than these, at least like unsightly postural patterns to come about?
Yeah.
And then
And
within that, it's like the way that you communicate, the way that you're successful in your life. Now we're starting to maybe veer back into like morning routine stuff. The way that you become a successful person is through communication. The way that you communicate is through body language. Albert Morabian is a professor in the 60s. He came up with a thing called the 55-38-7 principle. Suggests that 55% of our communication comes from body language, and then 38 is tone, and then 7 is the words we use. So if there's incongruence between any of those, we fall back on listening to what we hear in someone's tone and see in someone's body language. And if you are the shape of that hunched over position on the couch, and then in the car, and the office seat, and then the plane, and then the train, and then on the toilet, and then the bed, and then repeat, then that body does not visually appear to be confident, stable, supported, trustworthy.
I love that. So important. Also,
Interesting.
if your body takes on the shape of modernity, which by all means is not a, a healthful shape,
Statistically, it
you
seems like
shouldn't be surprised when you then are struck with a disease of modernity, right?
yeah,
If all you're doing are eating the foods of modernity, if all you're doing is sitting in the positions encouraged by modernity, then you shouldn't be surprised um, when something bad happens, right?
right.
And 60% of the deaths now worldwide, according to the WHO, are due to these non-communicable, chronic non-communicable modern conditions like heart disease, cancer, type 2 diabetes, dementia. And these are conditions that we largely have influence over, right? With our diets and lifestyles.
Yeah, yeah. And you talked about in the last episode before this, you're talking about I don't know, you could say it like the pandemic of fragility.
Oh
You
yeah.
didn't say use that language, but like that's people largely in modern culture, because we've outsourced most of our movement, at least, to technology. It's like the body begins to atrophy, and it begins to start to like almost disassociate in a way. And the way to repair is, you know you got to do.
You got to
You
do.
got to jump in.
Yeah.
And then it comes back to like, okay, how do we start to reformat our perception of what we do enjoy?
Hmm.
I personally find it incredibly uncomfortable just to like sit hunched over in a chair for 3 hours. And so that's probably something that's gotten shaped or formed into me to be like, oh, like I don't like the way that it makes me feel claustrophobic.
Are there any lifestyle practices that are good for you that are also uncomfortable for you? Or do you just like,
Yeah.
are you just like a
Oh yeah,
fish to
like
water?
cold plunges are incredibly uncomfortable.
Really?
Yeah, but it's just renegotiating the story,
Hmm.
to actually coming from a place of enjoying the process of seeking discomfort, because you know how good it's going to feel afterwards. And I think that that's the big thing is just renegotiating that story with ourselves and being willing to push through that initial whatever it is, 30 seconds, 1 minute, 5 minutes. If you want to go for a run and running isn't your thing, go for a maybe a quarter mile jog. You got out there, you're cool. Like, I don't have this big mountain of commitment where then I just say, oh, no, zero, I'm a loser, done,
Hmm.
binge eating.
Hmm.
I sit in there like, let's set, and that's what the value of an effective coach is. An effective coach is able to pinpoint where exactly is my client's boundary, like what's the top of their mountain, and then be able to hone in on that. And we can do that with, effectively coach ourselves, be able to hone in on that, nudge them right to that edge, and then respectfully push them past that edge, but not blow it out to the point that they feel like a failure, but not being so far away from the edge that this feels like it's boring.
Yeah.
Like, that's the key to education. That's the key to success. That's the key to a healthy relationship. If you're in a relationship with somebody that's boring, you're like, cool, I'm going to find something spicier. If you're in a relationship that's too challenging, you're like, oh, I don't have the resources for this. I got to check out. So the person that operates from that zone of just in the edge of discomfort, but being able to successfully, be able to make it beyond the obstacle, I think the most in their life, I think that person ends up being like, they win.
Yeah. I love that.
Yeah.
Okay. So upon waking, spend more time on the floor, um, which we've already talked about. What else?
Yeah. So getting up, exposing your body, so not just your eyes, but definitely your eyes to sunlight. So getting that infrared light when you first get up out of bed, you can maybe get some water or something, but really the same way that you're thinking, you could think of, vitamin T, or, touch,
Yeah.
contact, the way that um, different textures and, human contact or pets and all that stuff, affects us at a metabolic level. Also taking that same similar lens with light, and actually going outside and having the perspective that like I'm literally and figuratively consuming light when you go out and, just take a walk. It doesn't need to be any spiritual Egyptian sun gazing sphinx practice, whatever you could, whatever you're into. You just need to get some light as soon as you can throughout the day, because it's setting up again your neurochemistry and your hormones and your circadian rhythm for the day. So exposing yourself to sunlight first thing, getting some water.
Mm.
You can add a little pinch of sea salt in there would be great.
Why do you do that?
I mean, I'm sure that you've explained this on here before, but just it's very helpful with allowing our cells to actually be able to absorb
Mm.
hydration. You can throw a little lemon in there as well as a nice thing. I actually be curious your thoughts on that of the one, like alkaline diets versus more acidic diets, and using lemon juice is, lemon when it first goes in your mouth is pretty acidic, but then it's referred to as that the ash, once your
Yeah.
body breaks it down, it actually is quite alkaline for your body. Do you think that there's any relevance to that, or more alkaline diets in general?
I think it probably shifts the pH of the stomach, which causes then a chain reaction that could lead to a bowel movement.
Mm,
There are acids in coffee that are independent of the caffeine that coffee has that have a laxative effect. One of the reasons why coffee makes you go to the bathroom.
mm,
Um, so one of the reasons why decaf coffee can have the same effect depending on the kind of decaf. So I've talked about the difference between regular decaf and Swiss water
mm.
um, processed decaf. It's kind of a mouthful, but that method of decaffeinating coffee maintains some of the acids in coffee. I believe it's chlorogenic acid um, in coffee that has an effect ever so slightly of shifting the pH of the stomach. That is speculated to be one of the mechanisms by which coffee has that morning effect. Other than that, I don't see any major win to putting lemon in your water. I don't think you have to. I think the electrolytes are good advice because sleep is a dehydrative event.
Right.
Um, and so, especially with people who mouth breathe overnight.
Yeah, so that would be another thing in relation to setting yourself up for morning. The evening aspect would be taping your mouth.
I'm a
If
bit,
you if
I'm a
you
fan.
if you wake up with a dry mouth, it would absolutely be in your favor to at least experiment with taping your mouth when you go to sleep. And again, this one seems pretty wild for someone that's not been exposed to it or hasn't tried it. Then you try it, you're like, oh, that was actually pretty cool. And
Well,
you
for
wake up.
anybody who snores, or for anybody who has a partner that snores, definitely give it a shot.
Yeah.
Yeah, it can fix that right up.
Yeah, so you can just get I just get like the whatever basic like surgical tape from Rite Aid or whatever. They have like Lip Seal and various different brands. I've never actually tried them because for me the surgical tape works really well.
Hmm.
You get a huge roll and you just take a little bit off. You just get enough to essentially fit over your lips. You don't have to be like wrap it around your cheeks or anything. Because I have a beard, so I literally just put the tape like directly on my lips, and it's super simple, super easy, and then you're getting more efficiency of sleep by having that consistent nose breathing throughout the night, which is a really big deal. So starting off in the day, get some sunlight, get some water in you. Ideally, get outside. You can do a little bit of like movement. Music is a beautiful thing. I think the thing that really is just like starting the day off on a really positive note, like an uplifting note, um, is really invaluable. Protecting the morning is a really important thing. So do you schedule stuff early in the morning ever?
No, generally any appointment that I have is scheduled for 2 p.m. onward.
Okay. Oh wow, that's good.
Yeah,
Yeah, nice. Yeah, so I don't schedule hardly anything
if
until
I can help it.
until afternoon.
Yeah.
So really like protecting that container, as a point of, for some people it's going to be a really effective time to be creative. For any person, I think it's just a really important time to think of it almost like you're setting up a domino. So it's the positioning of that very first domino and acknowledging that the angle of that first domino affects the direction of the next decision, the next decision, the next decision. So starting the day off with, just coming from a place of balance, and um, so I think 2 hours or an hour or so in the morning for me personally feels really good. Um, but yeah, protecting the morning and protecting the evening, I think, is both really valuable.
Does coffee play a role in your morning routine?
Well, yes, it does. The recommended guidance is to wait on the coffee. So I typically as of recent have been breaking the recommended guidance. But 90 minutes is recommended from. Are you familiar with Huberman, Dr. Huberman?
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, he's gone into a bit about allowing your body to naturally wake up before exposing yourself to a bunch of caffeine.
Hmm.
So wait 90 minutes would be the common recommendation with that. I personally am guilty of breaking that myself.
Yeah, I wonder what sources he has for that 90-minute guidance.
I don't have the specific. I don't have the specific. But
Yeah.
he's got a whole podcast
I've
about it.
always used 45 as a good metric because that's when the diurnal cortisol spike tends to come down. I mean, honestly, there shouldn't be any reason to consume coffee first thing in the morning. But if you're going to consume coffee first thing in the morning, I feel like between 45 and 90 minutes is a decent threshold to wait because the rationale is that cortisol is nature's caffeine. It's your body's own endogenous caffeine. And it's the highest that it's going to be typically first thing in the morning. It's what
Yeah,
actually wakes you up, right?
yeah,
And so pouring coffee into that hormonal milieu seems counterproductive when cortisol is already doing its job,
yeah.
making sure that you're awake. And caffeine, the way that it works is it blocks adenosine receptors.
Right.
And you don't start to accumulate adenosine until like later on in the day. It's what makes you begin to get fatigued. It's like it's part of what is responsible for sleep pressure.
Mm.
So yeah, waiting until later in the day to consume coffee, I think is smart, but it's so important to so many people's morning routines um, that yeah, it's usually easier
What
said than
about you?
done.
What's your drink of choice in the morning?
I do water with a little bit of salt in it. Um, Lately, I have been putting some chlorophyll into my morning water, which
Mm,
it was on sale at Whole Foods. That's as scientific as it gets.
that's good.
So I picked it up and I drop it in. It's actually quite refreshing. There's nothing in it but chlorophyll and a little bit of peppermint oil,
Mm.
and I find it to be really nice in the
Mm.
morning. Actually,
Do you exercise in the morning?
I do. Yeah, I like a morning workout.
What time?
Usually fasted. 10:30 is like my sweet spot because you're benefiting from that cortisol, right? Like you're
Right.
you're energized in the morning.
Yeah.
It's like the natural time to work out, I think.
Yeah.
So I'll get to the gym at around 10:30, and then I'll work out for about an hour, and then usually after that, I'm running to get some protein.
What would you recommend for a person that feels out of sync with the the natural patterns of, once the sun comes up, we have energy. Once the sun comes down, we start to, veer towards bed and feel tired. If you're waking up and you're feeling sluggish,
Yeah,
and when it's nighttime, you're feeling amped.
yeah. Well, I think actually, abstention from caffeine altogether is
Mm,
really helpful,
mm,
at least for a period of 2 weeks to a month. And you could always bring it back at the minimal effective dose afterwards, after you resensitize your adenosine receptors to caffeine.
mm.
But I find that caffeine is one of the major culprits in terms of energy dysregulation for people, because caffeine doesn't create energy from thin air. It actually, you're taking a loan out
Yep.
on energy from later in the day, and that's a debt that's going to be repaid. And I was having some issues with my energy levels. I mean, there was a time when I was drinking when my morning coffee was so strong, I was using 4 to 5 tablespoons of ground coffee to make my morning brew. That's a lot of caffeine. It's
Yeah.
like 200-300 milligrams of caffeine, and I would just be wiped out. Like I'd feel like a train hit me by mid afternoon, and so I cut coffee out, and my energy levels completely stabilized, and I felt like I was at my peak performance all day. Of course, like naturally at the end of the day you start to wind down, you feel tired, which is completely physiologically normal, but I found that that was like a really smart move for me. And then now what I do is I'll have caffeine occasionally, or the last few mornings I've actually had 1 scoop of caffeinated coffee, of caffeinated grounds, and I'll mix that with a scoop of decaf grounds, and I still get like a nice euphoric buzz from it, and I know that I'm not overindulging on caffeine.
How long did it take before you felt like you were kind of past
Withdrawal,
the caffeine sweats? Yeah.
it took me 3 days.
Oh, really? That's it.
Yeah, 3,
That-
4 days.
That's not
Yeah.
bad.
It's actually a pretty pronounced feeling, in the sense that the first 2, 3 days, you feel like you're moving underwater. But then there's a very rapid, I think, turnaround, where by the 4th day I felt fine.
Mm,
I think the hardest thing for most people is the ritual. It's embedded so deeply into that morning ritual.
yeah.
But yeah, you can just get decaf coffee and and feel like you're not having to change the ritual at all.
Yeah. Yeah.
I do that. I love a good like decaf
Do
Swiss water
do
process.
you drink alcohol?
Minimally, but I do. I have like, two, maybe 2 drinks a month.
Oh, not much.
That's pretty much it. Yeah.
How do you notice that affect sleep or anything of the sort?
I try to sober up. If I'm drinking, I try to make sure that I'm sober. I don't have any sense of a buzz whatsoever before I go to sleep.
Mm.
And I try to make sure that I'm staying hydrated,
Why do you do that?
because sleep, although it can reduce sleep latency, so it can help you. It can quicken the time that it takes to get to sleep. It actually reduces the quality of sleep, and quality is really important. Duration and quality are both important when it comes to optimizing sleep.
What does it do to the quality particularly?
It shortens the amount of time spent in REM, in REM,
Mm.
which is more lengthier in the latter part of the night, but really important when it comes to fortifying mental health.
Mm.
Yeah, so you want to make sure that you're getting that good REM sleep. It's interesting. Sleep is front loaded with processes that fortify and strengthen the body, and the latter half of sleep to be um, tends to be associated with processes that fortify the mind.
Mm.
Yeah.
Yeah, I wondered about that. I've heard like the hours of 10 to 2 are like they're like sweet spot, like bonus hours of sleep if you can get to sleep around that time.
Well, I think it probably depends on where your phase is situated
Yeah,
over the 24-hour period. So
right.
I wouldn't obsess over the
Actual
the
hour.
hours themselves,
Yeah,
but consistency is really important.
right.
But yeah, I mean, when you first go to sleep, that's generally when you get that nightly pulse of growth hormone, of testosterone, really important for exercise recovery, for building new muscle mass. Um, Testosterone obviously plays a role in body composition. Um, and that's all like front loaded, and also slow wave sleep, like deep sleep. happens earlier in the night, which is when your brain is cleaning itself out. So the way that I like to conceptualize this is that the processes that are involved in your immediate survival um, tend to be front loaded in the earlier part of the night. So if you were like a hunter gatherer, for example, and you only had 4 hours in which you could sleep, the processes that are going to be favored are going to be the ones that make sure that at least tomorrow you can still climb the tree, you can still hunt the animal, et cetera, fight off the enemy.
Hmm.
And then it's the more dispensable, which we know is not dispensable at all. Mental health is so important, but I guess in the evolutionary sense, an afterthought to the processes that support the body, those happen later on in the night. So
Hmm.
that's why sleep duration and sleep quality, both very, very important. So you want to aim for 7 to 9 hours every night.
Have you ever tinkered with polyphasic sleeping?
No,
Me neither.
I barely even know what that is.
Or you're
I mean,
going, you're
I'm
sleeping in different intervals throughout the day. So as opposed, I mean, there's different ways to do it, but
mm,
doing like 90-minute cycles of sleep, bouts of sleep, and then waking up and continuing with your life.
that sounds like some Dave Asprey shit. Is that like real? Is that a thing?
It's a real thing.
Wow.
Polyphasic sleeping. I've never
Interesting.
tried it. I
Huh.
have no interest in trying that.
Wow.
Yeah, it's kind of an interesting thing. All the different ways of sleeping, like that's like sleep position is another relevant conversation around quality.
Yeah, I have some thoughts on that.
I'd be interested to hear your thoughts.
Yeah, I like to sleep on my stomach, prone position.
Wow,
It's better from a cardiovascular
dude,
and pulmonary standpoint.
damn, you are such a rebel.
It's not as good for your back, but you can prop up yourself using pillows to make it great for your back, which is what I do.
Mm.
But it's one of the reasons why, if for example, people in the ICU that are struggling with COVID, they're face down because it becomes easier to breathe
Mm.
when you're face down.
Do you just turn your head off to the side?
I turn my head off, but I'm propped in a way that allows the kink in my neck to not be as it's not like a 45 what is that, 90 degrees. It's not a 90-degree angle that my
Yeah,
head is turned. I'm like kind of I've got a pillow under my shoulder so that my shoulder is propped up a little bit so the angle of my neck is less.
we're gonna have to do a YouTube video about this.
Yeah, we should. I was going to do like a TikTok about how I sleep. I thought my sleep is dialed in. I can sleep 9 hours
Good for
start to
you.
finish. Yeah.
Never get a sore neck.
Never get a sore neck. No. Yeah.
Wow.
99 problems, a sore neck ain't one.
A
I
lot.
wake up every night to pee. That's pretty much it.
A lot of the sleep researchers recommend side sleeping. That's the common recommendation that I get. There's a guy called David. I think his name is David Tetley, and he studied um, primates
Hmm.
and the way that they slept. And he went out to like hung out with like Hadza people and various different tribes and kind of comparing the way that like tribal people, hunter gatherer, ancestral type people are still in that lifestyle, and also the patterns of primates. And his suggestion is that side sleeping is the solution. And there's a lot of talk of sleeping on your back.
Hmm.
There's talk of in like Ayurvedic medicine, they recommend sleeping on the left side because of the orientation of your lymphatic system. It's supposed to be supportive for lymphatic fluid.
Yeah.
Um,
There are different benefits to sleeping on your side. I think, from there was a mouse study a couple years back that found that
lymphatic system.
yeah, that
Yeah.
that a certain side in mice was more conducive to amyloid clearance
Yeah.
in the brain.
Yeah.
I don't know how well that would translate to a human yet. I don't think that research has been on, not at least to my knowledge, but
Alan Watts has a bit about sleeping. He says what's the best sleep position? He says sleeping is like politics. Sometimes you sleep on the left side and then you get tired of that. Then sometimes you sleep on the right side, you get tired of that. Then sometimes you sleep on, all sides, belly
I
back.
like that.
Yeah, I don't mess with people's sleeping positions too much. I think it's important to allow the spine to relax and get out of extension. And that's tied into that this is theoretical at this point, but I think that's tied into that lymphatic system. If there's tension in the spine, then that's going to be pulling on the connective tissue that's ultimately wrapping all the way up through the rest of the cranium around the brain. And so, if you are in this ready position, extended, ready to go, the body's a little bit more tense. So allowing the body to go into a position that's kind of like passive relaxed, like the kind of like the fetal type position, seems pretty consistent across nature, that's how people are going to be sleeping most effectively.
Hmm.
But there's so much different evidence and opinions and views that are
Yeah.
going so diametrically opposed to each other. And I mean, it's the same concept in food and most of these conversations. sleep almost falls into like the nutritional category of it just being abundant with debate.
Yeah. Well, I mean, the thing is, it's really hard to retrain yourself if you're used to sleeping on your back. Like,
Yeah.
for example, I've tried to sleep on my back because I have had in the past, and I still do to some degree, low back issues. And so I've heard from many an expert, maybe even you included, that sleeping on your back is best for the back. So I've tried to learn to sleep on my back, and it's just not happening for
No,
me.
yeah, I'm been if someone's asking my from what I've gathered, I would recommend ultimately side sleeping.
Hmm.
But the big thing is sleeping the position that you're actually able to sleep in.
Yeah,
Because if you're not able to sleep, then we're lost.
exactly.
So slowly easing that up, and also treating sleep in a similar way. Like you might want to use crutches of sorts to get yourself from point A to point B, and slowly start to pull those guys back. So starting off using as many pillows as you need, and making sure that your head is propped up, making sure that your arms aren't so collapsed in, so getting a pillow kind of keep your shoulders somewhat neutral. You can put a pillow in between your legs, same thing, keeping your pelvis neutral. And then eventually, ideally, maybe saying, cool, I can only sleep with 3 pillows. Let's try, now that we've figured that out, let's try to sleep with 2 pillows.
Hmm.
Let's try to sleep with 1 pillow. And then maybe occasionally try to sleep, go camping,
Yeah.
and starting to actively start to instill those moments of inconvenience or discomfort in your life, because our body, it grows, it adapts to the environment that we're a part of. And so if you're continually in a really soft, cushy, everything's like barely even making any contact, it feels like you're just always floating, then your body will start to adapt and only be able to be comfortable in that place, which ultimately is a very like precious, vulnerable, fragile body to live in.
Yeah.
So being comfortable, like that's something that happens even if you take your shoes off for the first time. You'll have this hyper sensitization to contact from the ground. And you need to literally spend some time desensitizing those nerve endings to this new uh, stimulus. That's like when you first get it, you're like, oh my God, it's too much. And then eventually it starts to feel good. So that thing that was uncomfortable, that was a limitation, suddenly it starts to feel good. And that's consistent across most aspects of our lives. The same thing with the cold plunge, same thing with going outside on a hot day, same thing with going outside in a cold day. Your body will respond to whatever the environmental stimuli that you expose it to, including pressures. And so exposing yourself to a wide variety of pressures, that's something that's really untalked about, I think. And like there's a very common conversation around heat exposure, maybe a common conversation around maybe like fasting, but varied pressures and opening up the space and the opportunity for your body to start to be able to adapt to that, is incredibly valuable for the overall robusticity of your body in the long term.
I love it. At what point in the morning do you have your first meal?
Typically not for a while, but again, I think this is a varied thing as well.
Hmm.
So for me, I'll run on, I'll put some butter in my, if I'm doing tea, then in my tea, my coffee, and I will not eat until I've worked out.
Got it.
Yeah, and then typically, I mean, I think this varies a lot as well, because a lot of these conversations, they end up being, just one voice on a podcast, and then that's representative of like all humans and all sexes. And I just had Dr. Stacy Sims on my podcast. Are you familiar with her at all?
No.
She's great. She's like a really amazing exercise physiologist, particularly focusing around um, women's menstrual cycles and how that affects their diets and exercise patterns and things of the sort. Most of the research that we get and gets spouted in podcasts and social media and magazines and such and books is coming from college campuses with 18 to 22-year-old white guys that could use an extra $50 to like strap some electrodes to their heads and go for a run around on a treadmill.
Hmm.
And then we integrate that information as being like, well, this is the research. And so I'm careful to try to have any kind of umbrella statements about things like that, particularly around like fasting.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that makes a lot of
But
sense.
for me personally, And I think probably for most men in general, I think having a morning fast makes a ton of sense.
You're always not feeling the pressure to eat as soon as you wake up.
Isn't that weird?
Yeah.
Yeah, all the stuff that we learn from a young age is just so strange.
Yeah.
Like the way that we're domesticated is very, very interesting. I,
Breakfast is the most important meal of the day.
yeah, I wonder how much of that ultimately comes from companies advertising as products.
Probably a fair amount.
It's
Because
wild,
the best way to get somebody to become a repeat customer is to have them ritualize their use of the product.
right?
And everybody has a morning routine.
Yeah,
Every human being. So that's where in that whole breakfast phenomena came from. I mean, if you like breakfast, by all means go for it. I think there's merit to some degree of consistency in terms of when you have your first meal,
yeah.
but there's no necessity from a biological standpoint to having it first thing in the morning.
And there's also so much variation to. I mean, this is like heart rate variability. Like a healthier body has greater amount of variability.
Yeah,
Right.
absolutely.
If you're just this sequential kind of like mechanistic, cool, 8 o'clock. This is always what I do at 8 o'clock. This is how many
Mhm.
calories. It's all weighed out. It's like that there's no intelligence there. I mean, it's not unintelligent. You might be really intelligent of why you're doing it, but from a biological perspective, like a complex system that our bodies are, um, there's so much variety in what's the temperature outside, what's the season, what's my activity level from the day before, what was my sleep quality, and so within that, I think that having that time, and this comes back to having those anchors throughout your day, those moments to check in and say, like, how do I actually feel right now? And I think that if we can start to instill those moments of like a deeper listening to what our body actually is saying, as opposed to just trying to overlay, our specific body into some research study or someone else's experience with their own body, and me trying to like fit those pieces. I think if we do create the space in our daily life to listen to what the heck our own individual bodies are saying, I think there's more information to be garnered from there than what most of us give ourselves credit for.
Absolutely. Well, I love your new book, The Align Method. It's phenomenal. What do readers stand to gain from reading
So
your book?
the function of the Align method is essentially the way I describe it is if you were an alien and you'd never operated the human body, this would be the quintessential manual on understanding not just the mechanical function, and how to derive leverage from your hips, or how to maintain healthy mobility through all the joints throughout your entire body, but also being able to tap into like a reframe of the meaning of fitness. So fitness isn't just what you do inside of a gym or what you do when you go to a yoga studio. Fitness is the way that you breathe on a moment to moment basis. It's the way that you use your visual muscles throughout the day. It's the ambient sounds in your environment and how you can start to kind of retune or reform your environment to literally reform the shape of your body. The concept of fitness, I think, has been um, I don't know, kind of like a neutered term.
Hmm.
And I think fitness ultimately is who you are as a person. And so the Align method, what it educates people on how to do is it really presents any situation throughout your day is filled with a ton of opportunities, and if we have the eyes to see them. And so what the book really does is it provides those opportunities in a simplistic way for people to be able to start to integrate into their daily lives.
I love it. Well, it's a phenomenal book. Where can people pick it up?
Uh, well, I mean, bookstores. I'd imagine most people are going to go to Amazon as the likely place.
Mhm.
Is Amazon as evil as people say it is?
I don't think so. I order tons of shit from Amazon. I watch movies on Amazon Prime.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't think it's
Oh,
evil.
that's true. Right.
Maybe it is. Maybe it is evil.
Yeah, I don't
I
know.
don't know.
I gotta go deeper into that Amazon wormhole.
But look, I use an iPhone. I mean, those things are made in sweatshops and who knows where.
Good God.
Yeah. So it's like if you're partaking in any aspect of the modern world, you're there's blood on your hands. And to negate any of it, you've got to negate all of it if we're being intellectually consistent,
Mm,
you know? That being said, I choose to vote with my wallet wherever I can,
yeah.
wherever I have the knowledge to do so.
Yeah. So I would,
And I do that with the food system all the time.
yeah, my first recommendation, recommendation would be to find a local bookstore,
Absolutely.
grab it there. And then once you're doing that, you'd be align methoding yourself all the way to the bookstore.
Hell yeah.
If you're taking a walk outside, and those are like really simple habits that, um, integrating some of these like fancy concepts and terms like neat and such into our lifestyle.
Mm.
It doesn't need to be fancy. It doesn't need to be complicated. It's as simple as taking a walk outside when you have a phone call, or if you have a meeting with a couple of people, say, hey, let's do this. Let's meet at a park. We're gonna go outside. We're gonna I'll bring my laptop, or whatever it may be. Or if I'm gonna go to a coffee shop, maybe I'm gonna do it at a coffee shop where I can sit outside. I can get a little bit of sunlight, and just slowly implementing those subtle changes into your life. Think of it from like, what's my 10-year plan? What's my trajectory with the long term with this path? And by implementing those subtle little changes into your daily life, it makes massive, massive difference. It's just a matter of starting to pay attention to the subtleties. And, a part of that, I just think it's unbelievable. I know we're wrapping this thing up, but I think it's so unbelievable that we don't get the education in as a child on how to operate our physical bodies in a way to be conducive to sleep effectively, in a way to be conducive to wake effectively, to communicate effectively, to think effectively. And maybe a lot of it's focused on thinking actually, but there's not a ton of education on how to drive the physical body. And so that's really the intention of anything that I'm doing, is I'm just interested in kind of peeling the layers back on that conversation.
I love it. Well, you're doing a great job.
Thanks, man. I
Yeah.
think I think you do such an exceptional job at um, explaining complex information in a simplistic, easily digestible way.
Thanks, man.
It's a true testament to the amount of time and energy that you've put into understanding and cultivating your craft.
I appreciate that, but I could say the same thing about you.
It's very cool, though.
Thank you.
Well done, sir.
I'm very impressed to see how far you've come in well, I guess I haven't known you for a brief time period. I've known you for quite a number of years at this point, but you've really exploded in terms of your own knowledge, your communication ability, your platform,
Mm,
your professionalism.
mm.
Yeah,
You become the product of 5 people you spend most time with.
you do. There you go.
So that's an interesting thing as well for people listening, is go through, observe your home, observe the shape of your office. So a really simple thing that people can do is just put a pull-up bar in a doorway.
Mm,
So there's a book, I reference this in the Align Method book. There's another book called Shoulder Pain by an orthopedic surgeon called Dr. John Kirsch, and I think we've talked about this before actually. But he found that 90 in a study that they did, 90 out of 92 subjects that he was seeing, or patients that he was seeing, that were going to be undergoing shoulder surgery for some version of shoulder impingement syndrome, found that 90 out of 92 people could be completely healed, all shoulder pain, full range of motion, mobility, just from a basic hanging protocol.
wow.
So something that I think is interesting, and then you could look at this from a nutritional lens as well, but looking at the evolutionary clues, in our bodies, as kind of little crumbs to lead us into how we live our daily lives. And one of the things that's a very obvious clue is our shoulder girdles are literally structured to hang. So monkey bars, the concept of monkey bars, humans are better brachiators or hangers than monkeys. So your ability to take your hand and reach back and grab your opposite ear like that, that's because you have a longer clavicle. The structure and function of your arm is literally like the length of your fingernails, your opposing thumb. All of it is structured and functioned to be able to reach up and hang off of something.
Hmm.
And so when you do that, when you just add a little bit of hanging into your daily life, just 90 seconds a day is the recommendation, which should be 15 seconds, 6 times, whatever it may be. You're opening up that space in around the shoulder girdle. It's called the coracoacromial arch, is a specific term for essentially a little arch on the superior, the top part of the shoulder that gets bound up, gets kind of agglomerated, stuck, impinged, limits your range of motion to go up overhead. And the simple practice of just reaching up, hanging for a little bit each day starts to open up that space, and also starts to open up space around the ribs and around the lungs and
Mm.
around the heart and your organs. It like just spending that time being suspended for a moment, taking a breath. Oh, you could feel your spine, decompress and start to relax and lengthen. Um, the implications for that are massive, not just on shoulder mobility, but the overall health of your body as a whole. So it's like simple little things like that. It's like, okay, interesting. There's something about the shoulder. It's clearly structured to do this thing that we just don't do anymore. I wonder what would happen if I just got a $30 pull-up bar and I just did that thing that the shoulder is so clearly structured to do. And then, what happens is a lot of good stuff.
If your feet hit the floor, what do you do? Just kick them behind you or what?
No, raise your knees up.
Raise your knees
Yeah,
up?
and if hanging is hard for a lot of, especially like older folks, that hanging is hard, you can get resistance bands is a great
Mm.
thing. You can get up on a chair. You can slowly lift your feet off one foot at a time. You could also get a chair in front of you. I have the exercises in the book, but you can put a chair in front of you, and you could kind of like do like a good morning position where you hinge your hips back, arms up overhead, and then bring your hands down on the chair, except that your hands would be over your head. So you're like stretching yourself out in that what would be like an overhead hanging position, but you're not actually hanging. You're just opening up that space in the shoulder. So there's gradual steps to be able to get the shoulders to be able to effectively go into that position. But by owning that position, and we really need to wrap up. But by owning that position of being able to have full shoulder flexion or overhead range of motion, what that does is it then potentiates you to be able to reach up over your head without borrowing from your lower back. So when people don't have that range of motion in the shoulder girdle,
Mm.
anytime you raise your arms up overhead, then to recover that motion, you end up dumping your pelvis forward.
Wow.
And now suddenly there's what was an impingement in the shoulder now trickles into a an instability in the lower back, and then disc herniations and various different downstream problems, including just like not being a very powerful body. So for your body to be able to produce strength, it needs to be able to find, a fancy term be joint centration or balance through each joint in the body. Essentially, a major point that people lose a lot of power, they dump a lot of power, is through the flaring of the ribs, and kind of like they just like this, the abdomen just kind of opens up, and then it puts a lot of stress in the lower back, and it disconnects the lower body from the upper body, and looks a little funny, and leads you down a path of ultimately of injury. And so to start to heal that or recuperate that range of motion, a great starting point would be looking at range of motion in the shoulders. Another starting point would be looking at range of motion in the ankle joint. There's limitation in the ankle joint. Every time you're taking a step, then that range that you don't have in the ankle will then go up into the knee, and will go up into the hip and up into the lower back. So it's really thinking of the body from the lens of like, when we can connect the whole dot, like the whole system, like the whole is so much greater than the sum of its parts.
Mm.
And ultimately, the way that we really do that, one of the ways is by um, changing again, like our lifestyle decisions. If you're coming from that same position all the time, and the body's kind of forming into that, hunched over, sitting on a chair position, it's going to be really challenging to really derive athleticism and longevity out of that body. And it's always going to be this process of going 2 steps forward, 2 steps back, 2 steps forward, 2 steps back. So change the environment and start to add a little, some training in there, and that's going to be the path to greater ease in achieving whatever it is that you want with your body.
I love it. You're so fluent in this stuff. I love the degree to which you live and breathe anatomy and physiology. It's so
Yeah, I enjoy thinking about it.
yeah. You think about it probably the way that I think about nutrition. It's like
Hmm. Yeah.
all day, every day.
The last thing I want to say in relation to sitting, like that's like been a popular conversation. Like sitting is the new smoking. That's been something that's been touted all over the place, and sitting is
You
not.
disagree.
Sitting is not the issue.
It depends on how you're sitting.
It's the manner in which you sit.
Yeah.
Yeah. So there's I think I might have talked to you about this at some other point, but there's research from University of Southern California recently. They went out and hung out with Hatsa people. Everybody's enamored by seeing what the Hatsa people were doing, and
They must be getting so annoyed.
Oh yeah, for sure. I'm sure. Yeah, and Hatsa is also they're changing.
Mm.
It's like actually truly untouched cultures are much more sparse. But what they found with this hunter-gatherer tribe, or the ones that still are hunter-gatherer, um, by attaching these devices that was able to measure their hip range of motion and knees and all that, they found that they were in resting positions quite similar amounts of time to industrialized populations. So the average was 9.82 hours per day. They were in some form of resting position. And the difference was their resting positions were more active positions.
Mm.
So their resting position was a kneel, their resting position was a squat, their resting position was sitting down on the ground, which would probably be like, maybe a cross-legged position or a straddle position. And that, once again, it's like they're really healthy, supple, no incidence or very low or low to no incidence of osteoarthritis of the hips, of the knees. It's the same case in cultures in North Africa and Eastern Mediterranean and Southeast Asia. People that are spending time getting up and down off of the ground, they don't have these, the ailments of modernity so much. And they're not working out. They're not taking, hundreds of dollars of supplements each week. Like, what's going on? It's like, well, they just have a more seamless fit with their environment. So there's less friction between their inherent biological native constitution and the environmental mold that they've placed themselves into. So if you start to create some congruency with, your biology in relation to the rooms that you occupy, suddenly life starts working for you.
Hey guys, if you enjoyed that conversation, you're gonna love this one.
If you're like low motivation, if you're feeling uninspired, we live in weird times, anxiety provoking times. What can people do to turn things around?
Well, I mean, the first thing I would always recommend is something that guys like we, as in SEAL team guys, would do in times of deep uncertainty, and that's just ask a very basic question. That's, what can I control in this moment? Our brains are question answering machines, and we kind of don't realize this, but I mean, that's the way our brains interrogate the world constantly. It's asking questions about what we're seeing and going into our occipital lobe, going through the Dewey Decimal System. Have I seen this before? Then going to the hippocampus and asking if there's experiences can be related to it. So it's always interrogating the world that way. What we don't realize is that our conscious minds act the same way. Whenever we deliberately place a question into our conscious mind, our brain has no choice but to give us answers to that question. So I do this experiment with groups sometimes when I do workshops. I say, okay, I'm going to give you 30 seconds and I'm going to ask you this question: How could I double my income in the next 30 days? I want you to ask that question, and I'm going to give you 30 seconds. Write down anything that pops into your head, right? And I give them 30 seconds, and they're scribbling, and I say, okay, I don't care about the answers. Just count how many answers you got. And usually it's the numbers between 2 and 5 or 7, right? Things they write down. And I tell them, the reason why I do that is not because of the question. The reason is because, it's giving an example of our neurology. When we place a question into our brains immediately begin to answer it. The problem is a lot of us do this without thinking about it, and we do it the wrong way. We ask questions like, what's wrong with me? Why am I so bad at this? Why is everybody out to get me? Right? As soon as we ask those questions, we start getting answers, and we're not going to like those answers. Those answers aren't very inspiring or motivating. And so, I mean, every single high performer or high performing team I've ever encountered, high performing human or high performing team, takes conscious control of the questions they ask themselves on a consistent basis. They ask better questions. They ask things like, how can I do better at this? How can I motivate myself? How can I get going? Who's out there that can help me? Right? You ask those questions, and some answers will start to matriculate into your brain. And the key is not to let yourself off the hook, because you're going to have a couple answers at the ready. Your brain's you're going to throw out a couple, but you have to say, okay, what else? And just challenge yourself. I am a true true believer, and I learned this trick back in high school, this question trick. I'm a true believer that the quality of our lives is directly proportional to the quality of questions we ask ourselves on a consistent basis, right? If we ask ourselves quality questions consistently, we will get quality answers, and the direction of our lives and the vector will be completely different. And so, yeah, if you're feeling unmotivated, if you're feeling down, if you're feeling like there's not a lot going on, start looking at the questions you're asking yourself and come up with better ones. And by the way, I'll just end with this, because people always ask, hey, Rich, what are some good questions to ask? But I can't answer that because that's a subjective thing. It depends on the person. But in a pinch, if you don't know the question to ask yourself this question: what is a better question right now? Right? And you will begin to come up with better questions. My wife and I were doing this in the pandemic when we were all quarantined, and we'd go for walks around the neighborhood with our dog, and sometimes we'd be pretty low, and we'd use the first lap to vent, and then the second lap we'd be like, okay, stop. This is not productive. What is a better question we should be asking ourselves right now? And we'd start to come up with better questions, and from those better questions, we'd get better answers. And so yeah, I'd say if you're low, start looking at the quality of questions you're asking yourself.
Sounds like a wonderful exercise to do with a significant other. That sounds like a really vulnerable thing to, and something that could really help bring you closer.
Yeah, I would. That's a great point, because I'd say in a really good relationship, I think this is probably automatic. I mean, I know my wife and I just passed our 20-year anniversary.
Mazel tov.
Yeah, thank you. And that's serious business, because she married me 5 years into my SEAL career, and she was with me the whole war, right? So she's a strong, powerful, wonderful woman. But I think one of the things we've often taken note of is the way we balance each other. When she's like down or feeling low or having issues, I tend to step up and kind of help her with better questions, right? And she does the same thing with me, right? And it's almost felt automatic, right? But as soon as we noticed that we were doing that, we're like, actually, this works out pretty well, And then sometimes we'll be down at the same time. We have to force ourselves to to just do it together. But yeah, it's a great relationship tool, I would say.
Would you write these down, these questions?
You can. Yeah, you can. I mean, really, whatever works for you. I think if you are truly in a funk right now in your life, I would say sit down with a piece of paper and write down some better questions. And preferably do it, and then look at them. If you only come up with a few answers, do it right before you go to bed, because there's science behind the fact that the stuff you think about kind of sifts into your limbic system while you sleep, and your brain can churn on it. So you're likely to wake up in the morning with some new ideas, or you wake up in the middle of the night with an idea and you just write it down. But yeah, I would say writing it down if you're really in a funk. I always recommend writing wherever possible, but you don't have to. You can someone can do this in traffic if they're frustrated, right? Because in traffic, you can be sitting there frustrated, like you can start spinning on stupid stuff, right? You could kind of say instead, hey, what's a better question? Like, what can I be happy? Here's a great question, by the way. What can I be grateful for right now? Because gratitude is a very, very powerful emotion. I mean, the neurotransmitters, the chemicals that we release when we're truly grateful, are just insanely good for us. And so just asking what can I be grateful for? It's hard to be depressed when you're in a state of gratitude. So
you're right. And everybody has something that they can be grateful for.
I mean, if you're alive and breathing, I would imagine yes.
Absolutely.
Yeah. I mean, Viktor Frankl wrote a great book, Man's Search for Meaning, about his time in concentration camps in Nazi Germany. I mean, one of the best books written. He talks about this and talks about reframing and talks about just making the most of a situation, and it's all done based on how you frame it, how you ask questions about it, and what you're grateful for. And it's just if a guy like that can do it, man. A lot of us who have, lesser problems can do it.
Oh my God. I mean, if you're in a concentration camp and you're able to find something to be grateful for.
Yeah.
And that means, whoever's listening to this can do the same.
Oh yeah, totally. No kidding. I mean, you can get over the funk. And of course, I'm not going to assume, anybody's problems. There are certainly some big ones, but again, just know that our brains are designed to do that. We can access and kind of take max advantage of our neurology.
I love that because, today there's just, I think people have come to accept chronic stress in many ways as normal, whether it's the panic porn that the media really loves to pervade, or the fact that, yes, we're still we're very much still within the pandemic, although I feel like I do have a sense that there is a light at the end of the tunnel, which I'm very grateful for. A lot of people have economic hardship, but also there's relationship stuff. There's, there's any number of things that that can serve as stressful stimuli in somebody's life. So this is really useful information. And I feel like you could also take these questions and kind of break them out. Like you can meditate on the questions that are going to serve you best in the more immediate time frame, but then also in the longer time frame. Like what are my goals?
Totally. Yeah, totally.
A year from now, 5 years from now, what are my goals for the goals for my family, the goals for my retirement, et cetera?
Well, I think, but it has to kind of be taken in steps, right? I mean, the near term stuff, the stuff that's in front of our face affects our emotions, and our emotions are clues into what's happening in our bodies physiologically, right? When we're angry, when we're depressed, when we're down and out, when we're feeling those emotions, we're generating cortisol. In some cases, it's a cortisol mixed with adrenaline, like in the anger case. Sometimes it's a cortisol mixed with acetylcholine, which is like depression. But cortisol, again, a necessary chemical to get us moving, right? But if it's in our systems for too long, it's hard on our system. It does some damage, right? So our bodies were designed, our nervous system was designed to go from sympathetic, which is that cortisol response, to parasympathetic, which is the rest and digest, the repair system. Well, parasympathetic system and those positive emotions start generating things like DHEA, which is the building block for testosterone and estrogen, oxytocin, things like that. I mean, so our emotions, depending on where our emotions lie, can clue us into how our physiology is working. If we deliberately try to shift states into gratitude, into joy, into peacefulness, right? We will be shifting our neurophysiology as well, right? And we will begin to repair our system. This can be done by questions. This can be done by visualization. But the key is the emotions. Here, a really quick hack into this is laughing, by the way. And we didn't get into humor last time we talked, but it's one of the attributes I talk about in the book, and the power of laughter. People don't recognize the fact that when we laugh, first of all, it's involuntary. And second of all, when it happens, we get juiced with three very powerful chemicals, two neurotransmitters and one hormone, right? We get the neurotransmitter dopamine, which we all know about. I mean, it's a feel-good chemical. Keep doing this. This is good. It's almost a hack into courage, because we talked about, I know last time we talked about courage. When we step into our fear, we get a dopamine reward. It's the human body's reward system. Very powerful chemical. So we get dopamine. We get endorphins, which is designed to mask our physical pain, right? It was the late 60s or early 70s. Scientists were studying drug addiction, how human bodies reacted to it, and they discovered that the human brain had opiate receptors. And they were kind of like, well, why the heck do human brains have opiate receptors? Well, the answer is because we make our own opiates. Those opiates are endorphins, right? Endorphins designed to mask our pain, because we were designed as endurance creatures, right? We were designed to go for the long haul, the long hunt, go for a long time to find food and shelter. So we needed chemicals to kind of help us do that. Runner's high, people who work out and have runner's high, that's endorphin. So you get dopamine, you get endorphins, and then you get it's not a neurotransmitter, it's a hormone. It's just a faster acting hormone of oxytocin. Oxytocin, known as the love hormone, right? It binds us and it's the bonding chemical. So, I mean, we experience oxytocin bursts when we engage in physical touch with other human beings or even animals. When we acts of generosity or acts of kindness, right? Even when we engage them, even when we observe them, right? When we observe an act of generosity or kindness, we get a burst of oxytocin. This is why it feels so good when you watch we watch nice things on the news, right, as opposed to bad things, right? So anyway, all that to say, when you laugh, you get all three of those all at once, right? I mean, so it's why laughter is quite literally the best medicine, because it's juicing you with all these chemicals. It can take you out of a funk It can take you into a courageous state. It can make you feel less pain, right? Cancer survivors, a lot of them are, all say, or many of them say, hey, I decided during this treatment, I'd laugh as much as possible. They juiced themselves with as many things that were funny as possible. So yeah, I mean, if you are really down, go find something to laugh about, right? Because that'll pick you up, not only emotionally, but neurobiologically as well. So it's
amazing. And there's so many options available to people now, right? Like obviously we have streaming services. I just watched the latest Dave Chappelle special on Netflix, which I loved. There's, comedy podcasts. So, I mean, really, these are incredibly powerful and thankfully very entertaining tools that people have at their fingertips.
Yeah. We got to honor our class clowns, and our comedians, they are doing us a very big service in making us laugh. And any friends you have that can help you laugh. This is what people ask me what I miss most about the SEAL teams. And I don't use the word miss because that typically implies longing, right? But I look back fondly upon the most are those times when we were we were just in the worst situations and we were laughing so hard we were crying. I mean, because it was inevitable that someone would make a joke. I mean, you almost train yourself to just, when things get really bad, you have to joke about it because it's like, oh my God, I can't believe this is so bad. We have to laugh, right? So yeah, I missed that quite a bit because it was just a natural hue in terms of our pack there.
I love that. I mean, one thing that I'm getting from this conversation that I think is so true is that it can be difficult to think your way into a new state, into a new mood, but it's much easier to act your way into a state change. Whether it's like something as simple as writing down things, or even just thinking about the things that you can be grateful for, or putting on a comedy podcast. But personally, for me, whenever I'm feeling lazy or unmotivated, three things actually really help me. I force myself to go to the gym, and I recognize that even a shitty workout is better than no workout.
Yep.
So I force myself to go to the gym, and I'm a different person leaving the gym than I was walking into it. I also, saunas are a wonderful tool for me, but even probably more so than saunas, cold water immersion.
Oh yeah. Love that.
Are you familiar with any of those modalities, like the science behind any of those modalities? And can you speak to them?
I can speak to them in somewhat layman's terms. Yes. I mean, I have in my garage, I have an ice chest that I fill with water and keep it about 32 degrees. So I jump in that, frequently. My son does it now too. So, I mean, cold water immersion, I mean, it's designed to ramp up all of your systems. It's a sympathetic response, of course, but it's you're releasing a bunch of hugely powerful hormones and transmitters when you're going through that. I would say that it's not for everybody, or at least to just know that it's not, guys like us, I think, and people who've done it now understand that there's pleasure behind the pain. Okay. But it is painful getting in, no doubt. But yeah, the cold water therapy, I think the saunas do the same thing, just in the reverse, for heat. I would say though, for people who are not interested or can't go to that extreme, it's kind of like you said, some people might not even be able to go to the gym, right? But get up and going for a walk. I mean, just going outside and breathing fresh air. Take off your mask because you don't need it outside, right? And breathe fresh air. I mean, it's so for example, going to the beach, for example, and just sitting on the beach, which is one of the reasons why I love being on the coast. But this works in any area where you can get to an open horizon. Okay. It's been scientifically proven that open gaze, which is your ability to kind of look out, stare out in front of you and not focus on anything. So you're kind of noticing your peripheries. That's open gaze. It's a soft gaze, right? That has been proven to shift our systems into parasympathetic, right? Off of sympathetic into parasympathetic, which means it's calming us down, right? Wow. This is because when we're stressed, we tend to focus in on the threat, right? So focus becomes really dialed in with tunnel vision when we're stressed. So to deliberately open gaze makes us more relaxed. This is exactly why people who live in either on the coast or in areas where they have access to big horizons tend to be more relaxed, right? Mm-hmm. Versus people who live in the inner, in the city where there's buildings tend to be more less relaxed, right? So even just getting moving, getting outside, and getting your eyes onto an open horizon, those are things that are going to make you better, feel better, and it's going to be kind of accessing your physiology in ways that you haven't, you might not have accessed before. So you're right. I mean, get movement and visual tools, getting movement, getting in there, getting our brains, thinking. But even like a good song, music can shift our states, as well. So I mean, we should all have at least a set of 5 or 10 songs that when we hear it, we're like, man, I just feel good. Those are great ways to do it. So I would say to those people, just ask some better questions, do some diligence on asking yourself, what are some triggers that you can pull out of your repertoire? There are some things in your repertoire that you can pull out and access almost on demand that will make you feel better in the moment, and then once you're feeling better, you're better state in the moment, then you're way better prepared to start doing what you're saying and making those long-term goals and saying, okay, now as I look out in the next 6 months or a year or 5 years, where do I want to be? And write those down.
I love that. Music is it's a totally subjective thing, but I have to ask, what are 3 songs that you might put on when you're stressed out?
Well, ironically, people are going to think this is funny, but Metallica is one of my favorite. I mean, is one of my most favorite bands. And so like the music off of And Justice for All or Master of Puppets, which some people would be find very angry or irritating, really calm me in a way that's, because I just love the precision of it. It's just so I'm a big fan of what I call precision aggression. When it's just really fast and precise. I think this is one of the reasons why I enjoyed what I did in the SEAL teams, because the ability to kind of run into a room and take a shot so quickly and so precisely. I just love that. It was always you always shot one bullet at a time because you had intent behind every single bullet, right? Well, it's almost like I feel the same thing when I'm listening to a Metallica song, because every single guitar chug is intentional, right? So that makes me feel it just, I don't know. It's just something I like. I think soundtracks are great. I think you and I joked about last time we talked about the Dark Knight trilogy and the soundtrack, right?
So good.
And I think one of the some of those scores, I mean, I just put those on and you just feel, you just feel like on top of the world, right?
Well, it makes you feel like a superhero. Quite literally.
Totally. So I think those. I think the Man of Steel soundtrack is awesome for that. I mean, so it's subjective. So you got to pull into your pull into your own bag of tricks and figure out what works for you. For some people, Metallica might feel. My younger son's funny. I listen to Metallica with him. He's like, Dad, this is stressing me out. I was like, okay, well, I'll stop it, right? But he loves he plays the banjo, which I love. I mean, because I love that type of music too. But my younger son plays the banjo, so he just likes that different style of music, which is cool. So yeah, it's highly subjective.
That is amazing. Yeah, I like. I'm a bit of a rock head myself too. So when I'm stressed out, I put on my favorite band is Muse, or they're one of my favorite bands, and they go pretty hard, but just it lifts my mood like no other.
Yeah.
I love it. Movies are great just because it gets you, when you're immersed in a good story, it takes you out of your head.
Right. This is where escapism actually works quite well. I mean, people, there's a lot of, some people badmouth escapism, right? I don't badmouth escapism necessarily. I just say don't do it too often, because if you do it too often, then you're going to be unproductive, right? But sometimes it's just getting out of your head that way and escaping into a different story is exactly what you need. And depending on the genres, you enjoy. I don't necessarily enjoy drama, dramatic stuff, because it doesn't take me into a nice escape. It doesn't make me feel good afterwards, right? So there was a lot of bad mouthing the Avengers, movies as their kind of theme parks, or there's theatrical, going to a theatrical theme park, and I was like, yes, absolutely, that's exactly why I go. I love it. I just love the theme parkness. It just made you feel good, right? So yeah, it's classic escapism. So
yeah, I love it. Moving on, you're a Navy SEAL, which I think is the coolest freaking thing ever. What does the morning routine of a Navy SEAL look like?
Oh, okay. Well, first of all, I'm a former Navy SEAL, which is entirely different than being an active Navy SEAL.
What? But isn't it? But isn't it once and always Navy SEAL? Always a Navy SEAL, or no?
No, I mean, I don't think so. I think that it's funny. I've had this conversation with a couple of people, to include some of my buddies who are also retired. The Marines have a saying: "Once a Marine, always the Marine," right? And there's absolutely nothing wrong with that. That's a cool saying. My brother's a Marine, right? So the SEALs are a little bit different. I kind of analyzed this with a couple of my buddies. In the SEAL teams, there's the saying is you earn your trident every day. The trident is the big gold pin that you get when you become a Navy SEAL. It's it's your SEAL designator. And the idea is that you earn your trident every day. And so once you leave, whether you get out of the teams or you retire, you're not really earning your trident every day. You've put it on the shelf, right? So I don't think, and again, I there are guys who are active right now doing the job. They are doing the hard work. I'm not doing it anymore. I'm proud to have done it. But I need to honor and respect those guys who are doing it. And I never want to be one of those folks who kind of keeps that as a thing. It's something I'm putting on the shelf and I'm honoring. And of course I'm using my credibility from that life to help me come up with some ideas for the book and other things I'm doing. But the idea is that it's on the shelf and I'm moving into a whole new facet. So anyway, that's a long answer to why I'm a former Navy SEAL, not a current one. But I would say, when you're active Navy SEAL, your routine can vary, but it typically is you're going to get up, you're going to go to work, you're going to PT, do some sort of heavy PT, and then you're going to go train, whether it's shooting or diving or whatever you need to do. It might be maintenance or whatever like that. So you try to train as much as you can, and rinse and repeat and do that over and over until you actually have to go somewhere and do it for real. As a former Navy SEAL, it also depends on the individual. It gets a little bit tougher. And so I love to work out. I try to work out, if on my good weeks and months, I'm working out 5 times a week, and mixing between, conditioning and strength training and even running and, stuff like that. But I have to say, Max, it's not as easy. I mean, when it's not a part of your job anymore, at least for me, it's a little bit tougher to do. So I still work on it. Where I know there are some guys who retire, they're diligent about it every day, but it's never out of my mind. I should say that. So
now, when you're in training, I'm imagining you have very early mornings. Is it
it depends. I mean, again, the one of the things I love about the SEAL teams is we were always very practical. It's kind of like, if you don't need to get up early, then don't get up early. I mean, it's we would get up early. I mean, the earliest we would get up a lot of times was when we'd go out west to do skydiving, and we'd do like these, heinous skydives where you go out like 22,000 feet and things like that. And we'd get up really early, like 2 or 3 a.m. to do these jumps. A, because we wanted to get some nighttime training in, but B, because out there in the desert in Western United States, as soon as the temperature starts to warm up, you start to get dust devils. And dust devils are they're like catastrophic when you're underneath a parachute. You do not want to get.
What's
a dust devil? Is basically it's basically a mini tornado, right? It's just a. If you're out in the desert like Nevada or Arizona, you might see swirls of dirt, right? These swirls of dust, kind of looking like a tornado. These things just rise up because of the temperatures, the temperature differential. So it's like a mini tornado, right? And you can imagine what a mini tornado will do to a parachute when you're under canopy. It's not good. So those things, a lot of times, those things would start to show up around 9 a.m. 9 or 10 a.m. And so we try to get all our jumps in before that. But other than that, yeah, it's just you get up. You usually get up at a reasonable hour. You train, and then if you needed to train at night, you just train late, and then sleep in the next morning. So yeah, there was never any. It was never like we do like the old Army thing. We do more before 9 a.m. than most people do all day or whatever. Sometimes that was the case, but sometimes it wasn't. So it was
wow. And are you fasted primarily, or what? I mean, what's your breakfast like in these?
It depends. I mean, I always prefer to be fasted. I would even when I was in the teams, I would almost eat nothing before going on missions. I just felt sharper if I didn't. That was completely dependent. A lot of guys would go have dinner before we'd go on missions. I wouldn't eat anything, just guys, because I always felt sharper if I didn't. And I think now, and back then, I mean, you got to think I was a SEAL. I mean, from 1996 till 2016. So I mean, the whole intermittent fasting stuff wasn't as predominant in terms of the health and science as it is today, right? So my fasting was just because I don't feel like eating. I feel better because I'm not eating. Nowadays, I'm sure that guys are probably doing a little bit more scientific decisions based on when they eat and what they eat and how they fast. But again, you got to recognize. I mean, being a SEAL and doing operations, and I say, I don't know how much is going on now because there's really nothing going on now, but we were doing operations on a nightly basis, and you never, when you're going out on something like that, you never know how long it's going to last, right? So you don't prepare for these things the same way an athlete prepares. You're always managing your physiology for the long term. It's like, I don't know how long I'll be out there, when I'll need to be at 100%, when I'll need to dial it back. So this is kind of an energy management exercise that you really learn, even basic training when you're in buds. I mean, you're constantly grabbing recovery points where you can. I remember in SEAL training, buds, even in Hell Week, when you only sleep like 2 hours for the whole week, they'd always have races, right? Boat races. And so if you came in like the first in first place, or sometimes second place, but you in first place, they'd say, hey, okay, you get to go put your boat over there and sit by your boat, okay, while you waited for the other people to finish, right? Well, if you ever got that chance, you'd sit down and you just fall asleep as fast as possible, and you might only be asleep for like 3 minutes, right? But it's still 3 minutes of sleep that you get, right? So I think it gets inculcated into your system that you try to find those breaks. And I remember, I mean, we'd be flying on the helicopter into missions, like to go insert on missions. And I'd look around the helicopter and some guys were sleeping. Some guys were just listening to music. Some guys were just chilling. I mean, there was never any of that like rah, fired up. Let's get all, that doesn't happen, right? Because that uses too much energy. You're just like, hey, I'm going to keep it loose, keep it relaxed. As soon as I need to turn it up, I'll dial it up, but I'm not going to waste an ounce of energy if I don't have to. So I think that's kind of how most of us, certainly how I manage my life nowadays.
What does a Navy SEAL, a former Navy SEAL, do when that very common human emotion, laziness, arises, and you feel like procrastinating or not necessarily doing the things that you have to do? Like, what's the kind of self-talk that gets you through those moments?
So I think the first point of analysis. So it's always about analyzing what's going on, right? I mean, so the first point of analysis is, how often am I doing this? In other words, how often am I procrastinating? How often am I being lazy? If the answer is not very often, sometimes the right answer is, okay, I'm going to be lazy right now. I'm going to enjoy my ability to be lazy in this moment, right? I mean, this is called balance, right? Sometimes it's okay to be lazy. Sometimes it's okay to procrastinate. If you're consistently doing it, that's a problem, right? But I think the understanding of the ebb and flow of energy requirements is pretty necessary. I have been at points, where I'm sitting at my desk, I'm like, God, I don't feel like doing anything, and I don't feel very creative. Okay, I'm not going to do anything. I'm going to walk away from my desk. I have the ability in this moment to not do anything. Now, if you don't have that ability, if you need to do something, then you just have to say, okay, suck it up, ask some better. It's kind of like you saying, no matter how hard it is, you just get to the gym. You just suck it up and do it. And just say, hey, procrastination is not an option in this moment. Laziness is not an option in this moment. So just get the job done. I think one of the advantages, and certainly something I'm grateful for, having been in the SEAL teams and learning this, I guess I probably had a little bit of it in my system already, was the kind of the ability to be very pragmatic about the whole thing, right? I mean, I'm whatever I need to do in this moment, I'm going to do. All right. I mean, that's, if it has to get done, I'm not going to worry about it. I'm not going to complain about it. I'm just going to do it. There's complaining does nothing, right? It just uses energy, and my wife and I joke about this. This happens even in parenting and in marriage, right? I mean, my wife and I are just a true team. And when we're in the house, it's like, hey, if she's busy and I'm in the kitchen and the kitchen is a mess and there's only one person there that can clean it, and that's me, and I don't feel like cleaning it, but guess what? Oh well, I'm just going to clean the darn kitchen, or I'm going to do the laundry, or and we just both, that's one place we get along, and I think something that you found in the SEAL teams too is like people just understood, hey, if the job needs to get done, just do the job. Just don't bitch and moan. That is useless energy. It's not doing anything for you. That also allows you the opportunity to, when the time comes where you're like, you know what, I just feel like being lazy right now. You can say, well, you know what? Nothing has to get done right now, so I'm going to be lazy. I'm going to enjoy the heck out of being lazy. I'm going to play my video games and enjoy that, right? So yeah, I think it's just being pragmatic about the whole thing.
I think oftentimes we let perfect be the enemy of the good, right? We have like black or white thinking. If we're not always on our A game, then we might as well not even try to ever be on our A game.
Right.
So I think it's really important not to strive for perfection, which is an ideal that doesn't really exist in any aspect of life.
That's right.
But instead to do the best that you can, and maybe try to iterate, right? Like try to be a little bit better than you were yesterday.
Yeah. Well, this is kind of what I describe as the difference between peak performance and optimal performance, right? And everybody nowadays seems to be chasing peak, on a peak as much as possible. But we have to understand peak. Peak is just an apex from which we can only go down, right? I mean, that's it, right? And it also has to be scheduled. It has to be planned and prepared for. I mean, the pro football player plans his entire week so that he may peak for 3 hours on Sunday, right? And really, when people would come to me and say, well, you SEALs, you're the ultimate peak performers, like, actually, we're not. We are actually optimal performers. And optimal performance is different. Optimal performance is how can I do the very best I can in the moment, whatever the best looks like in that moment, okay? Sometimes the best looks like peak. Everything's going and clicking and flowing, everything's cool. Sometimes my best is I am head down, grinding it out. All I got is the ability to go step by step. That's all I have. And it's dirty, it's ugly, it's muddy, it's gritty, it's grimy, but I'm just head down, gutting it out, okay? And there's nothing fun about it, right? That is also optimal performance. And so if we think about performing optimally, it allows us to do a couple things. First, it allows us to pat ourselves on the back in those moments where it's just ugly and dirty and grimy and gritty, and we're just going step by step, right? But then it allows us to think about energy a little bit differently. Think about energy in a long game way, right? Sometimes I don't need to be peak when I'm driving to the grocery store. I can actually relax. The guys in the helicopter were going to the mission. They understand that they may in fact have to be at ultimate peak in the next 10 minutes, right? So in this moment, they're going to be, relaxing, eyes closed, calm, collected, conserving energy, right? So I think it's just much more both realistic and responsible for us to strive for optimal performance versus peak performance, and that allows us permission to not be perfect. Like you said, perfection is the lowest standard in the world because it's impossible, right? I mean, so don't try to chase it because you're never going to get it. So strive for the long game and start celebrating those ebbs and flows. And I think you'll set yourself up for long-term success, especially in times when the environments get really, really challenging.
Yeah, that's true. What do you do when the environment does become really challenging? And, you're in a situation like oftentimes we can change the environment, right? We can architect the environment to be easier, to be more aligned with our goals, our values. But sometimes you can't change the environment. Like if you're dealing with like a sick loved one, for example, if you are, like you're in a situation that you just can't get out of.
Yeah, no, you're right. I think we fool ourselves in thinking we can change our environment, but we really can't. I mean, the environment's the environment, and there really is very little certainty that we know exactly what's going to happen. I mean, something can happen anytime, and so I think what we have to understand is there's a couple things that we can manage that we have direct control over. We have direct control over our physiology, first of all. So understanding that we have control over our physiology helps us bring down anxiety. We can manage anxiety through that control. We can do things that help us shift out of sympathetic response into parasympathetic response, right? Whether it's open gaze, like we talked about, breathing techniques, right, that you can use to relax, to calm down a little bit, visualization techniques, whatever, music, whatever those things are, whatever you have access to in the moment, you can use to shift your physiology. Once you shift your physiology, what's happening is, and again, people have to understand, when anxiety begins to ramp up, we start to initiate the fear response. The amygdala gets tickled in our brain, so we start heading towards amygdala overload, right? As that starts happening, our frontal lobe, conscious brain, starts to come offline, right? And as we get closer and closer to amygdala hijack, that we get less and less frontal lobe control. So full-blown amygdala hijack is we're just moving, we're not even thinking, right? And that is not good in any situation, right? I mean, so managing our anxiety helps us bring our conscious mind back online, okay? Once our conscious mind is back online to a good extent, we can then begin to manage uncertainty. Uncertainty deals with the external, okay? And there's very little we can do about the external in an uncertain environment external to us, other than we can start to manage our perception of it. And we do that through appropriate questions, right? And we start asking ourselves, okay, what about this environment do I understand? All right. Now, but just by asking that question, you might take that 100% of uncertainty and maybe boil it down to maybe, I don't know, 80% uncertainty. So it's like, okay, 20% of this I actually understand. Okay. Out of that 20%, what can I control in this moment? All right. And then you immediately focus in on what you can control. What can I do right now? Sometimes that is like, well, I know how to manage myself over the next hour. Sometimes that's like I can manage myself through a count of 10, right? The next 10 breaths, I will do that. So a great example would be, again, in SEAL training, you do surf torture, right? Where you line up with your fellow students and they have you march out into the surf zone to about knee high. You turn around and you lay back, and the waves just crash over you and then they recede. Now you're in Southern California, so you and those people in your area understand how cold Southern California water is, right?
Yeah.
A lot of people in the rest of the U.S. don't understand. They think Southern California, think it's tropical. No, that water is damn cold, right? Especially in November or in the wintertime when it's down in the 50s, right? So that surf torture is like one of the coldest things you experience. You get a lot of people quitting during surf torture because you're in there for what seems like hours, right? You're just freezing your ass off.
Wait, so you're just surf torture? You're lying backwards into the water? That's it? You're just in cold water? It's not that cold. You're
laying backwards, and the waves are basically crashing over you, and then receding and crashing over, and you're getting pulled. So there's a little bit of water torture going on because
it's like water. You're being waterboarded by the waves.
A little bit by the waves, and just know that the water's cold, and then the water recedes, and the wind hits you, and then the water hits you again, and the wind hits you. It's like a combo, right? And so. And it's usually at night. So I can remember sometimes being in surf torture and just saying to myself, all right, well, this sucks. I'm just going to focus on the fact that even though I'm freezing right now, probably in a shorter period of time, I'll be on that beach and I'll be doing so many push-ups that I'm really hot, right? And that's how I'd get through it. And then I'd be on the beach doing push-ups. I'd be like overheating. Like, well, I mean, I'm going to do this, but soon I'll be in the surf zone freezing. I'll cool off, right? And so you can manage. Sometimes that management is like just moments in front of you, right? You say, I'm going to manage the next few moments, or I'm going to manage, the next few hours. Some guys will say, well, I just focused on the next meal. I just make it to the next meal. That's what I can control. But largely, just put this in normal people's context, right? Because the SEAL stuff's crazy. Just in life, in environments of uncertainty, you can begin asking yourself questions. As long as you're managing your anxiety, okay, what do I understand and what can I control in this moment? Then take charge. Do that. And you will actually initiate a dopamine reward system. You'll get a reward. Your system will reward yourself for accomplishing something. And it'll allow you to ask the question again, okay, now what can I control? And step to that. And it's just, that's how you step through uncertainty and challenge and stress, as long as you're managing your physiology.
And why do they put you through that, like in the SEALs? Is that just so that you are then accustomed to just really high stress situations?
I would say it's deeper than that. You're accustomed to performing in high stress situations. You unconsciously become a master of doing what I just talked about, right? And then you transfer that to combat when the shit really is deadly, right? And you really have to calm down and manage. And I remember my, I live here in Virginia, and in my neighborhood, like across the street from me is a SEAL, and then like down the road to the right there's a SEAL, and then down the road to the left there's a SEAL. So I have 4 SEALs in the neighborhood. And I remember my wife saying once, she's like, "Well, I'm really glad these guys are in the neighborhood because when you're gone, if something happened, I know I could go to them and they would act like you act." And I'm like, "Well, what do you mean?" She said, "Well, if something happened and I went to them, as soon as I would tell them, they immediately would calm down and they'd start working the problem." And I recognize that is a Navy SEAL trait. I mean, so I would say it's special operations, but I mean, certainly you hyper develop this idea, this habit and technique of when the shit starts really falling apart around you, you immediately calm down. You immediately calm yourself and start thinking through it, because you understand that panicking and getting upset and getting stressed is not going to help anybody, right? It's almost uncanny, and sometimes when you look back at it, you're like, "Oh my gosh, I can't believe I was calm in that moment." But you just do it naturally, and this can apply to anything you're doing, which is really quite cool.
Dude, I would not want to be like a carjacker in your neighborhood.
No, not recommended.
No.
Yeah.
Damn, 4 in one neighborhood. That's insane.
Yeah, that's probably neighborhoods around here that have more than 4. So.
Wow.
Yeah. So.
Man, not a group to trifle with.
Yeah, certainly. Well, it's not. I guess it's just not a good idea. We're pretty vigilant. So.
Man, so cool. Does that level of discipline exist anywhere else in the world? I mean, for in any other profession?
Oh my God, yeah. I think so. I mean, yeah, I think it exists in many professions. I mean, the SEAL profession is just one. I mean, you look at masterful musicians, you look at masterful artists, surgeons, teachers. I mean, name any profession and find its masters, and you will see that level of discipline, because that's what it takes. I mean, it takes. And now, what would be interesting would to be studied the context of that. How does that show up and manifest? One of my favorite movies, I'm not sure if you saw this, is called The Comedian. It's Jerry Seinfeld made a movie shortly after he finished the TV series, and it's on Netflix actually. It documents him. He had just basically thrown out all of his old material. He said, he'd retired. I said, thrown out. He had retired all of his old material, and he was basically learning new, building a new routine, building a new comic routine. And I just love watching these. I mean, stand-up comics, I think, are some of the best examples of grit and determination, and what I call like selfless art, right? So the way I describe it is like a painter, or even an actor in some cases. But let's just take a painter. A painter is more selfish art, right? So a painter can just paint what they want, right? And they're like, "Hey, if you like it, great. If you don't like it, fine." I mean, it's just, I liked doing it, so this is, if you like it, great. Comedians don't get to do that. Comedians have to create something, and the only way that they're successful is if someone else likes it, right? So it's selfless, right? It's selfless art, because they have to go literally stand on a stage and risk every time. And it's like, I mean, I think Seinfeld, I love watching Seinfeld because he deconstructs comedy so deftly, right? He takes it down into the elements, and it's like, yeah, it'd be like going to work in your underwear every day, right? I mean, you're just opening up and just seeing what works. And it's just a painful, slow process of getting like, all right, I got 5 good minutes. Okay, now I got 10 good minutes. Okay, now I got 15 minutes. All right, now I got 20 minutes. Now I'm at 30 minutes. And like he talks about, like the coup de grace for a comic is like having a 60-minute, bit. How to be able to do a special or stand up in front of an audience and give them 60 minutes, right? But it takes months to get there. It takes months of just grinding out in comedy clubs, trying things out, going
years
back
probably.
to the. Yeah, I mean, depends on the comic, but I guess it depends on the dedication. I mean, guys like Seinfeld, or guys he talks about, will be at the clubs every night. I mean, even Chappelle. I mean, Chappelle, you watch Chappelle and he looks so polished, right? When he's up there on his Netflix specials, that's a guy who's in the clubs and he's just basically working on shit, and sometimes if he's trying new stuff, he'll get 90%, no laughs, and maybe 10% will work. He's like, okay, I'm going to take that 10% and massage it and see what happens. So I think we talk about that level of discipline. You can find it everywhere. And I think anybody who's really, really good at what they do, it doesn't come easy. I mean, none of this comes easy, no matter what profession you pick. I mean, even podcasting, man. I mean, you could say, I mean, how many times did you have to do this before you're like, okay, actually, I think I'm actually good at asking questions now. This is feeling a little bit more natural. I mean, you don't just sit in the seat and make it happen. You have to do it over and over and over again. I mean, that takes discipline.
Oh yeah, I thought I sucked when I first started.
Yeah.
That was probably why I had the idea of doing a podcast way earlier than when I launched it, but I didn't. I procrastinated on it because I was just like, I don't think that I'm going to be any good.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, I definitely started better than I thought I would have, and I've gotten better over time. And now my podcast is the most fulfilling thing that I do. I love it so much.
Yeah, and it takes work. It takes anybody who wants to be good at anything and get to the point where they really are loving it, right? It's going to take some discipline. It's going to take some scraped up knees or egos or whatever, scraped up whatever.
Yeah. Well, it's very interesting that you bring that up, because this is something that I've been thinking a lot about recently. And it's that most people have a near zero tolerance for criticism.
Yeah.
And so they live lives and they curate their lives and their professions and their environments where the chance of being criticized drops to near zero, right?
Right.
But some people out there, a minority of people, have a higher than average tolerance for criticism.
Right.
And I think those people end up being the musicians, the comedians, people like me. I get criticized every single day.
Yeah.
And I'm fine with it.
Yeah. Well, and just so people know, criticism doesn't necessarily have to mean just people saying bad things. Criticism comes in all different forms. I mean, getting hurt, like the skateboarder who falls a dozen times before he or she nails the certain move. That's criticism. It's just coming in a different form. The Navy SEAL who's training and finally gets it right. That's criticism in a different way, right? So I think you're absolutely right, is that if you want to be good at anything, to be masterful at anything, you have to accept the fact it's going to hurt. You're going to get some bruises, scrapes and bruises. They may come in the form of people saying, hey, you're full of shit, I don't like you. But it might also come in the form of you just getting your knees scraped up and your elbows scraped up and your head, knocked around a little bit before you're good. But it has to happen. I mean, growth is that process. Growth. We don't. It's funny. Our learning. The way we learn, the neural networks that connect when we learn something. Okay, there's a bunch of neurotransmitters and chemicals that happen right when we create neural connections, and then of course when we lather that connection with dopamine, i.e., get better. Well, what they found is that the points at which those neurotransmitters, those chemicals, are at their maximum are when three things exist in experience, right? Those three things are focus, intensity, and novelty, right? When you have all three of those neurotransmitters, all those chemicals are at max capacity for you are forging lessons, okay? This is the difference between being told a stove is hot, it's like, okay, thank you, or touching the stove and realizing it's hot. When you touch the stove, there's focus, there's intensity in the heat, and there's novelty. It's like, cool, I've never touched anything that hot. It's also why, when we learn the alphabet through a song, we never forget it, because there's all three of those things. What we have to accept is that this is why painful experiences teach us more than good experiences, okay? Because whenever we go through pain and suffering and strife, what is present inherently? Novelty, intensity, and focus, right? So it's neurologically proven that pain and challenge and this type of stuff teaches us things faster. It forges us in a faster way. And so you can if you know this, you can avoid it, or you can choose to embrace it. And man, you'll learn quickly. So
I think you ought to embrace it. I mean, also, not only does criticism help you serve as a fulcrum from which to learn from, but it, if you're being criticized, chances are you're doing something original.
Totally.
There's that line, I don't know, I think it's sometimes attributed to Aristotle: to avoid criticism, do nothing, say nothing, be nothing.
Right.
If you seek only to to live a cushy life where you're not being confronted by anything, minimal risk of failure, no criticism. Yeah, I mean, it's just, you could probably find a life that caters to that, but it's
and
not.
some people might be perfectly comfortable, and that's their prerogative. I think what we have to understand, though, and just to throw the one caveat to the criticism when it comes in the form of people, right? There's a slight difference there because it's people's opinions and therefore judgment, which means there's an extra calculus that's involved, I think, for people who are working on growing something, and that is sometimes that criticism means nothing, and so some of the criticism from people is to be ignored.
Yeah,
you're right. Whereas again, it's different for a skateboarder. When a skateboarder falls while trying to, that you can't ignore that. It's like, okay, I did something wrong. Exactly. Sometimes people are just, especially in the world of social media, where any lala can get on Twitter and say something. Sometimes it's to be ignored. Sometimes it's to be laughed at. I just recently I got an email. We'd have this assessment tool on the website so people can go and find what their attribute scores are. And we're working on it. We're trying to improve it and things, and we're trying to get it better. I got one recently, and it was just a response saying, "You're full of shit. You know nothing, Rich Snow." And I was like, I wrote back immediately. I was like, this is one of my favorite criticisms, because I love Game of Thrones, by the way.
Yeah, who doesn't love Game of Thrones?
So it was just like, this is, I mean, we're working to get it better, but I had to laugh. And it's like, so sometimes criticism from humans is to be absorbed and metabolized in a good way. It's like, okay, I'm learning something because that's actually effective criticism. Sometimes it's to be completely ignored because like this person's just standing on a pedestal for no reason. And then sometimes
just
it's to be laughed at. Yeah. And sometimes it's just, oh my God, that's hilarious. Thank you for that laugh, because that's funny. So
well said. Don't take criticism from anybody that you wouldn't take advice from.
Right.
Good advice. Yeah. Trolls, man. There's so many trolls on social media, but there are trolls in real life too.
There are, but in the workplace. We've heard, I mean, the social media allows for a predominance of trolls because there's zero accountability, right? It's so much harder. For me to go, you and I are virtual right now. If you and I were face to face, it's so much harder if you say, "Hey, Max," like in your face, "Max, you are full of shit and you know nothing." That's way harder because there's going to be a consequence to that statement when I'm face to face with you. And it might not be physical. It might just be like a hurt look in your face, right? You'd be like, "Oh my God, that really hurts." That's still consequential for me emotionally.
I mean, let's be honest. You're a former Navy SEAL. There's going to be minimal consequence for you.
Well, no, even if you were hurt, like what if you burst into tears? Then I'd feel bad, right?
Right. There you go.
There you go. But I mean, again, social media takes away the consequence. It takes away any accountability. So someone can literally say something. It's like lobbing grenades from behind a wall, right? Someone can say something that's extremely critical. This is what's happening with our teenagers, right? With the teenage bullying going on. The bullying, I mean, back in my day, I hate to say that, I sound so old, but back in my day, bullying was in your face. I mean, someone looked at you and gave you a wedgie while looking you in the eyes. You knew exactly what was happening, right? The social media allows that shit to happen with no accountability, and that's why it's so dangerous. And that's why if there's one lesson we should remind ourselves and teach our kids, is to take zero stock in what you're getting from social media in terms of criticism, unless it's very well thought out and done. I've had some very well thought out emails saying, "Hey, Rich, I took this and here's what I feel," and blah, blah, blah. And it was like, oh my God, thank you so much for taking the time to write that out and tell me what we could do better. That's like very, very helpful. But if it's not like that, discard it.
Yeah, I mean, and you are a newly minted public figure. Your book, fairly recently came out last year, and so has that changed your relationship with social media?
Well, I didn't have one before the book came out, so we created one, and it's been slow going. And I'd say I approached the social media relationship already with this idea that I wanted to do it carefully. I wanted to do it thoughtfully. I am not someone who trends to that type of stuff anyway. I mean, I'm used to being a ghost, which is, so when you get on social media and start posting stuff, it's like, that's kind of weird. So my, I know my web team has said, "Hey, just, you need to do more, push more and get some more stuff out there." And it's fine. We're just getting paste on it. But yeah, I've gone into it with a very, realistic view. about what can come back. And really my thing is, hey, listen, this is not, none of the stuff I do is, do I want to be about Rich Devaney? I mean, that's not, I want it to be about the ideas. I mean, there's nothing about, I'm just a guy who has some ideas that I think can help people, right? And if can get those ideas out to people so that they can help themselves, help other people, that, it doesn't have to have a big Rich Devaney on top of it, right? Just do more with yourself, find your potential, and that's all I need. So,
yeah. I'm just curious, have current trainees in the SEAL program reached out to you? Have they found your work? Has it resonated with them?
Yeah, I'd say yes, because I am still involved. One of the older SEALs who was retired when I was getting in, but he runs an organization that helps guys get to SEAL training, and he said they've recommended the book to some of the guys in the training process, and they really found it very helpful. So that's cool. And then I have a couple team guy friends who are still in the system. Who one in particular who does some instructing. He said, "Hey, I'm trying to get all the instructors to read this so they know more." So that's really cool. And then when I have buddies who are former team guys with me and they say, "Hey, I'm making my kids read this book," I'm like, "Okay, cool, that's nice." so yeah, it's filtered in there. But again, the SEAL training the Naval Special Warfare community has been doing some great work on this type of stuff ever since we started talking about it back, almost a decade ago. So they've made tremendous progress in that vein as well. So I think we've seen a very nice uptick and kind of a progression of us of the whole community looking at this stuff a little bit more deeply.
I love that. For listeners or viewers who are not yet familiar with your book, The Attributes, we did a whole previous episode on your book and some of those attributes. And I think as I mentioned earlier, in this episode, it's a wonderful book. People should definitely check it out. But just give us sort of like the high level notes on what people stand to gain from reading your book, because I think it's a really good one. It's definitely worth checking out.
Well, thank you. The idea is that our performance, the team's performance, has to be broken down into elements, right? It's not just about what we usually think it's about as skill. So there's a difference between skills, which are those things that we learn and you can teach, and they're very didactic and visible, and attributes, which are hidden qualities. They're the things like patience and situational awareness. Those qualities we bring into a situation that inform our behavior rather than dictate. And so what I did was, based on a lot of the work I did while I was still a SEAL and I was running training, I basically broke down what at least 25 of these attributes are for optimal performance. And so I think a reader can read this book and start to get a sense of how and why they perform the way they do by understanding how much of each attribute they have, and then what each attribute means in terms of the context. And so I think we talked about it last time, but the categories are: what are the attributes that make up grit? What are the attributes that make up mental acuity, how our brain processes the world? What are the attributes that make up drive and being a driven human being? What are the attributes that make up great leadership? And then the attributes that make up great team ability, our ability to work with other people on a team. And so by reading the book, the book is really not a SEAL book at all. It's a book about the reader, right? So when you read it, it's really about you, the reader, and allowing you to say, okay, let me figure out my own performance. How can I deconstruct my own performance, see why and how I show up the way I do? Ultimately, we are all, I kind of liken us to automobiles. We're all automobiles, but some of us are Jeeps and some of us are SUVs and some of us are Ferraris. And there's no judgment, because the Ferrari can do things the Jeep can't do, and the Jeep can do things the Ferrari can't do. But it is a good idea to look under your hood and figure out what you are, right? Because you may be a Jeep that's been trying to run on a Ferrari track all this time, or a Ferrari that's been trying to run on a Jeep track. And so understanding that allows you to say, okay, now I know, okay, I'm actually going to go to a Jeep track because that's what I want. That's really where I'll be happy. Or if you decide, hey, I am a Jeep, but I still want to run on this Ferrari track, then you start to know exactly what you need to work on to be a better Jeep running on a Ferrari track, right? So it's all about these elemental factors that make up our behavior and our performance. And so that's why it's kind of a fun book to dig into and dissect oneself.
Hey, if you like that video, you need to check out this one here, and I'll see you there.
Community, with this, where people feel separate, and so distant or apprehensive. I think more and more people need to connect, and who we spend time with is who we become, and And people ask, with the book titled Limitless, it's like, how do you become limitless in this limited world? My answer, I think, really is we do it together.